Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and we're going to be doing a new episode of The New Yorker. The focus of this episode is to concentrate on how New York and the United States is failing. We're going to play several videos, some from the same YouTuber, some of them from mainstream media about the immigrant crisis, the illegal immigrant crisis, and taxation, problems with crime. So let's begin.
Here we are on Wall Street, and the people that run this place are buying up as many homes in America as they possibly can because it's their goal to own the American dream and rent it back to the rest of us. What a nightmare.
It's a scenario that would frustrate anyone looking to invest in their first starter home or a growing family hoping for an extra bedroom or a yard. A lot of first-time buyers feel it's just out of reach for them.
The typical U.S. home sold for a record-shattering $468,000. That's unaffordable for most Americans.
We have not invested as a nation in building the supply of housing in a variety of communities and a variety of different price points.
Preventing healthy turnover in the housing market can also hurt marginalized communities.
What does that mean for renters that want to be in that neighborhood or want to access to housing? They're shut out.
A recent New York Times investigation found that in Charlotte, North Carolina, Wall Street investors with all cash offers accounted for 17% of all home purchases.
So it seems there's a new villain in town who's coming for your home. But is it Wall Street, or is there more to this story than evil investors pricing out the little guy and renting him the American dream for more than he can afford? We're going to answer that, but first it's important to understand the nasty direction America's headed if we can no longer own our homes. Plus, there are other issues at play here whenever Wall Street buys a home that nobody's talking about. But first, think for a moment about where we're headed if this trend continues. If all of the land of the country is concentrated in the hands of a few rich individuals, we're essentially headed back to the dark ages where you had a system called feudalism where the rich owned the land and rented it out to the farmers who had no choice but to starve or work the land and give the landowners their cut. And back then, land wasn't for sale.
Now, the reason why you listen to my channel is to get these gold nuggets of original thought, right? Well, the United States and the world at large, but especially the United States, the middle class is getting gutted, especially with AI. All right. And what's going to happen is that the haves and the have-nots will divide even further because that middle ground was the middle class. All right. And you could have a decent way of life as in, at least in America, in the middle class. That's getting gutted. And you're going to start hearing hemorrhaging of jobs, and there's going to be financial insecurity within that class. And the ones that didn't cross over to the rich side are going to move into the poor side because where are they going to go? The middle class is being gutted. So you're going to have kind of like an aristocratic society. And you're not going to really, the ones that are poor aren't going to really own anything. And they're going to be basically on subsistence, a universal income that's going to erode because of inflation. So what's going to happen here is either the citizens rise up and destroy the aristocracy, which I hope happens, or we're going to move into like a new era that's very similar to what was going on in Egypt in biblical times, where there is many years of slavery, this feudalism, and there's going to be a dark age that takes place. Hopefully that does not happen, but from my take on how AI is being implemented, how the American citizen isn't willing to rise up and stop the tyranny using force, and we have representatives that don't care, I see no I see this going in the direction of feudalism.
Meant not owning it meant you never would. And you had a dynamic at play where the people who didn't own the land were totally dependent for their very survival on the people who did. Now, to many, the idea of having to rent the American dream from a rich mega corporation sounds like a total dystopian nightmare. But some analysts are predicting that Wall Street could control 40% of the U.S. home rental market by 2030. That's almost half. And that would mean renters in 2030 have almost a 50% chance of these guys being their landlord. And according to the Wall Street Journal, big institutions already own 55% of all apartment units in the country. And this sounds bad, almost like corporate monopolies are taking total control of the housing market, forcing out the little guy so that he's got to pay him a fee every month to have a house, which would keep people out of the property market forever. Wall Street buying homes.
Yes.
Good thing, bad thing, normal part of life. No wrong answer.
I think it's a bad thing.
It's a bad thing, okay. Why?
Because then they would own a monopoly.
Okay.
Make it more harder for the average American to afford decent price homes.
But in order to figure out if these things are actually going to happen, or if this is a dire misreading of how the economy works, we've got to look at where things stand today and how aggressively this Wall Street home buying process is.
As of 2023, corporate landlords only command a small portion of the rental housing in this country.
Institutions, large companies only account for about 2% of the single-family rental housing.
There's a small but mighty group of companies that lead the industry.
Interesting. So big money controls only 2% of all of the homes in the entire country, but critics say that's not enough and that they want more. On top of the 55% of apartments they already control. And although 2% of homes doesn't sound like a lot, housing prices are already starting to show the signs of increased competition, and they're skyrocketing, which is pricing out the middle class. Look at this chart right here. Who can afford these crazy high prices? Normal people or big companies that are traded on the stock exchange? But what most people don't know is that Wall Street actually started buying homes back in 2008 during the financial recession. And at the time, it was something that benefited the country because home prices.
This is a very good point that Cash is making. Cash Jordan's making. Back, and I maybe I can dig up the book while I'm playing the video. The Creatures from Jekyll Island book, I read many years ago. All right. I think I read the second edition. I may have read the first. I'm not sure if it's the first or the second edition, but it was before the Lehman crisis. I think I read it in 2000. I want to say 2004. All right. And I think he published it in late 1990s. So I may have read the second edition, but it's gone through, a couple editions. It was predicted in that book that there would be a financial crisis. Now, this is all before Lehman crash. A financial crisis where there would be the rich buying up property, and that there would be this gutting of the middle class and this society of renters. Now, he didn't get into the whole Schwab thing from the World Economic Forum where everything's rented and you're going to be happy. He focused more on just the housing market because the whole book was about how the Federal Reserve was orchestrating a crisis. All right. That's kind of the premise of the book, is the Federal Reserve is an evil entity that needs to be abolished. It did kind of sort of play out that way. We did have a financial crisis in 2007, kind of started in 2006 in some areas of the country, but it didn't really flare up until 2007 and 2008. So this is what we call the Lehman crisis, right? And the housing, the housing crisis. And many financial institutions were at risk of failing and needed a major bailout. This is where the whole quantitative easing and TARP came out from the Federal Reserve, with Bernanke being the federal chairman. So it played out a little bit differently than how the book was seen, because from my memory, it was more focused on the middle class. America was more stressed than the actual banking institutions. But I don't think he was predicting the whole problems with the derivatives market and how it blew up, all right, with these mortgage-backed securities, with faulty loans having a high rating, bond rating. So there was a little bit of a complexity of what really happened during Lehman. But this concept of financial stress leading to people needing to sell their home or feeling that they need to sell their home, because sometimes it's just perception. And you have institutions like BlackRock coming in and buying these homes and have no intention of selling them. They have every intention on owning suburbia in the United States and renting it out. That's not sustainable. That's not a vibrant middle class. And that is going to be the downfall of the United States, because upward mobility is being able to, over time, build assets. But if you're constantly just paying a rent payment, an inflated rent payment, you're never going to build assets. So you're going to have a middle class that will be a slave, literally a slave. It'll be a modern day slave. So there's no difference between that and what was going on in biblical times in Egypt. And it's two things that have happened. The American public allowed it by not being more vocal and more forceful, more kinetic against the government that is taking away your civil liberties, and against the institutions, the financial institutions that is gutting the middle class. Now, it's up to you if you want to fight for your financial and your civil liberties. But if you don't be surprised that the end result is slavery.
Falling like a rock. But when these guys entered the market and started buying homes, it established a price floor at which homes were always going to sell. And that actually may have helped American homeowners preserve the value of their homes because they wouldn't sink further than that floor. Back then, Wall Street was the only place willing to bet that the U.S. economy would recover and that home values would recover. And proponents of investment companies buying homes say that, hey, this was good for the country back then, but critics say that today, while the average U.S. home buyer finds housing unaffordable, it's a bad thing, and Wall Street has overstayed its welcome in the housing market.
In recent years, corporate landlords have been most active in the Sun Belt. In 2021, corporations bought 28% of all the homes sold in Texas. That figure was 19% in Georgia and 16% in Florida.
But on the contrary, they only bought 11% of the homes in New York State and 0% of the homes in Vermont, which means Wall Street's only focused on buying certain types of homes. This here is the Sun Belt region of the country, and Wall Street's betting that home prices in these demand-driven areas will increase relative to home prices in New York or Vermont, where they ain't buying much. Now, since Wall Street knows that demand for homes in that part of the country is rising, what they do is they enter those markets ahead of the people that are migrating there for economic reasons. And if they buy up all the homes first, when a normal person gets there and looks for a place to live, they won't be able to find anything to buy, but they will find stuff to rent. And that's because Wall Street already owns the home they were going to buy. And Wall Street's smart. They know about money. They know how much money the people who are moving to these new areas of the country are making. They know how much money they typically have saved up. They know how much money they can typically afford for a down payment. And
it's going to get a lot harder to fight this when you have AI being implemented in the job market. You'll need less humans. And these AIs are modeling human behavior. So who's doing this future prediction of the middle class, or the gutting of the middle class, or the retirement of certain parts of the middle class? They'll know 10 years ahead or 5 years ahead and make the move. So when that migration happens, these corporations are going to make a ton of money by just renting these units out. So AI is speeding up the process, and AI is becoming more accurate than the human modelers. See, I don't think the people that are listening to my channels really has it set in yet. Until you forcefully stop this, you are going to lose the middle class. You have to be vocal. You have to get engaged, or you are going to be a serf.
how much money the final price of a home they can buy is, and how much is just a little bit more than they can actually afford. But this incredibly savvy business model might actually be bad for the country, which is why many people want to see publicly traded companies out of the housing market. And they say if that doesn't happen, this could destroy the country.
Okay, it will destroy the country. Now, there is a easy solution to this, assuming that you have a forceful citizenry fighting back. And that is making sure Congress forces the hand of the Federal Reserve that special provisions for loans to banks and to these institutions that need bailouts when there's a financial crisis, they don't get it if they're in this kind of market. So you force them out of the market because they would prefer the loans from the Federal Reserve when they need it than to be in the housing market. It's only that the Federal Reserve is allowing it to happen on why this is happening. It's happening because Congress is not regulating this and preventing these institutions from buying up these properties. So there is a mechanism, but the citizenry needs to be forceful. You need to get on the phone. You need to call your congressman. You need to call your senator. You need to be bugging your state legislature. You need to be bugging your governor. And if you don't get the answers you want, there needs to be widespread protesting at City Hall, at the governor's mansion, at the state and the federal legislature, to be able to voice a huge concern about the gutting of America. But if you are going to be just a keyboard warrior, you're going to lose out. The rich are going to get richer, and most likely, because most people that are watching social media are in the middle class, most likely the probability of going in poverty is much more elevated by not acting. And our founding fathers warned us of tyranny, warned us of individuals taking power that has antithetical vision of humanity when compared to the Constitution. Now, are you going to be an engaged citizen or not? You didn't do too well during the crisis in 2020. Didn't stop it from happening. Could have. Didn't. The warning signs were there. Didn't stop it. People told you to stop it. Didn't. Now, if you weren't willing to do that in 2020, or the women that couldn't feed their infant because there wasn't formula on the market, and they didn't mass protest about it and let Biden pass on that problem, they weren't even willing to even protest for their own children. The chances of them protesting to fight AI and to stop Wall Street from buying your suburb, chances are you're going to fail that too. And that's why America's going to hell, because you have a citizenry that's not willing to stand up and do anything about it.
What's up?
Hi, Jera. We brought you here today to let you know that we
I gotta play
made
this
the
commercial.
business decision to switch to ClickUp. Your performance has been decreasing over the last few quarters. There's no innovation, no new features, poor customer support, and there have been several complaints for years.
But you know, I just have my way of operating.
I know, and we really appreciate everything that you've done, but we just can't be productive with you on the team. And we gave consideration to the fee hikes, but then there was the server issue, and now you're telling us that you don't have the speed to work with our new projects, and we can't proceed.
Come on. It's not that bad.
Well,
Just wait, middle America. When AI gets implemented, you're going to start seeing a lot more of that in your life.
So the immediate problem here is that now first-time home buyers or buyers at the lower end of the housing market now have to compete with large corporations with super deep pockets to buy what are essentially starter homes, aka lower-cost single-family apartments and houses. But since the corporations have all of the money, this is a David and Goliath fight, only this time Goliath is winning.
All home purchases in 2022. 17% of homes swooped up for real people who are generally unable to compete with all cash offers in a market that's generally built for people, particularly young families, who borrow money from banks to buy homes.
So the issue here is that the home buyer, especially a first-time home buyer, they're just starting out. They don't have a lot of money. They got to go out and get a loan to buy anything. But most sellers would rather do a deal all cash. They prefer to sell to somebody who's got the money right away. On top of that, new home buyers have a limit for how much they can borrow. They can't borrow unlimited amounts of money. And if the price of a house gets bid up, the corporation might be able to buy it for just a little bit more than the person who was trying to get a loan for it can qualify at, which means purchasers looking to buy a rather modest accommodation, they're going to be pretty much maxed out no matter what the place they're buying is. And if that gets done over and over again, the housing market becomes twisted because new home sales are based on the prices of past home sales. This just greatly puts upward pressure on the price. Now, you might be thinking, what's the big deal about owning a home? Why don't people just rent? After all, most New Yorkers rent, and we're doing okay, sort of. Well, if that happens and more Americans are forced to rent, it could cause massive problems for how the economy's worked for decades in this country, which is very frightening.
You're looking at what's going to give you an economic advantage. You really have two things. You've got the wages you pay to do your job, and typically you've got your house. Correct. Because the real estate has gone up in value. So if you're a working class person, you buy a house and it goes up in value.
So typically, home ownership is how middle class Americans build wealth and pass it on. And the reason it's a problem Wall Street's buying so many homes is because most Americans' primary source of wealth is the home they've lived in. And although over time the cost of housing has tended to go up, it's always seemed to go up just enough that the next first-time home buyer or home buyer is able to purchase the home that is being sold. In the past, you could live somewhere 20, 30 years, and then when you retire, you could sell that home to somebody else at a much higher price. That takes care of the retirement for the person who sells the home, and it takes care of housing for the person who then goes and buys the home. But there's a problem. Today, about 2/3 of Americans own a home, but only about 40% of Americans have a savings account specifically for retirement. And what nobody's talking about is that owning a home might not actually be the wealth creation engine that a lot of people think it is. Because think about it this way. If a corporation buys your home.
And think about this, and I saw this problem with, geriatric patients and, problems with my own parents. A lot of people don't understand that when you get older, and your health is starting to fail, that your family members may not be able to care for you anymore physically, and that you have to go into nursing care. Now, the way the whole nursing care works, if you're really, really wealthy, it doesn't matter because you can pay the $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 a month bill. All right. And believe me, that's how much it costs. All right. It's middle of the road is around 5 to 7. Upper, is 10 plus, 10K plus. All right. A month. All right. Most people can't afford that. So what happens is that you start spending down their retirement savings per month to pay for the nursing care, to the point where you're actually signing over the assets of that individual to the nursing care corporation. So if they own a home, the owner of that home is now really the nursing care. Now, how it normally happens is the home is sold and all the proceeds, the profits, go to the nursing home. And in many cases, a lot of these people own their home. They don't have a loan on it. They may have, or they have a very, a very modest loan. So the asset that's sold minus the loan is either -0 because they don't have a loan, or it's almost totally paid off. So there's a lot of profit, and all of that proceed goes to the nursing home. The way that, and the Social Security goes to the nursing home. Any 401k goes to the nursing home. Any money that is remaining in accounts goes to the nursing home. Any bonds or stock goes to the nursing home. People need to wake up, and this is the reason why I keep on saying, if you don't take care of your health, you're going to be fucked when you get in your late 70s or 80s, assuming that you were healthy and had a proper lifestyle in your teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I have seen it with my own eyes, and how families are destroyed because of this whole near the end of life healthcare. Now, Cash Jordan is young, so he doesn't understand what I'm talking about. Some of the people that listen to me are in their geriatric years, maybe not in the late 70s or 80s, but they just started their retirement. Some of them are not. Some of them are in their 40s. Take my advice, everyone that's listening. If you don't take charge of your health, you're going to be paying in the end in higher healthcare bills and in nursing costs, nursing home costs. So when this whole crisis starts to happen and you don't really own any property, your care is going to go down because you don't have any buffer to absorb when you start getting sick. Because when you start getting sick, you start to pay down, you start to cash in some of those bonds or cash in some of that 401k, or tap into some of the assets that you may have. But if you don't have assets, if you are a generation that's just renting constantly and you don't have any assets, by the time you get to 70 years old, you will not have a buffer when you get sick. And that's why you need to start paying attention to when I keep on saying what you need to do to slow down aging and improve your health. That is proper diet, proper exercise, proper balancing, proper challenging your brain, talk to people, read, write. Don't spend too much time on social media. Be an engaged citizen so you don't get taken advantage of. And proper sleep and proper supplementation. If you do that on a regular basis, you're increasing the probability of less healthcare problems down the road. And when you start having those healthcare problems in your 70s or 80s, let's say, you've been somewhat healthy, but God forbid something happens like a stroke and everything seems to be fine, but all of a sudden you have a stroke. Well, your healthcare costs just radically went up. Or you had a heart attack. Your healthcare costs just radically went up. Or you have dementia. Your healthcare costs have just radically went up. Or cancer. So you either engage and take charge of your own life, or you're going to be paying the man. And I am not wrong on this. Ask anybody.
They can then turn around and rent it to somebody else. That's an investment. It generates rental income. But when a regular person buys a home, they go out and get a loan to do it, which means they take on a ton of debt, which they then have to pay back. And since most homes are bought with a loan, when you purchase one, you're essentially financing someone else's retirement, and you have to pay that back with money that you have to then go out and earn. You haven't earned it yet over the next 20 or 30 years, which in a way kind of makes home buying and selling a means to transfer wealth from one person to another. But this is how the country's been run for a long time. If this stops happening, a lot of people aren't going to know what to do. And if corporations step in and they own everything, they're essentially creating a new style of modern day serfdom. And that's what's alarming to a lot of people, including several lawmakers who want to crack down on corporate landlords buying up homes in the country. But that could actually cause more problems than it solves.
Blackstone.
Hi, this is Mark Barton, City for Promise in Newtown today.
And hi, this is Nicole Hockley, also from Sandy Hook Promise. And we wanted to bring your attention to the bill for universal background checks. We need your signature.
So let's get this straight. You have corporate America buying your homes, and then you have people that are using emotional fallacy to try to erode your Second Amendment rights. So you have the option to be able to fight the government if you need to. Because remember, the Second Amendment wasn't to go hunt Bambi. It wasn't even to protect your home from people that can't pull up their pants. It was to protect your family from tyranny rising from the government. If you don't believe me, read the Federalist Papers by Hamilton and Madison.
Do you think Blackstone should buy homes?
Should buy homes? Is it regular homes?
Yeah, they're buying regular people's homes.
I mean, it's the capitalistic world, but probably not.
This is their office right here. They're one of the largest institutional home buyers.
The largest. They are the largest.
The largest.
The reality is, it's all about an opportunity.
It is.
If they see a market opportunity, that's what they're doing.
Some members of Congress believe limiting corporate activity in the housing sector is a good first step.
Wall Street is going to buy up a single family home and it's vacant for a couple of years. We're going to tax it, forcing these firms to sell that back into the market. What we're saying is don't have private equity buying up single family homes. That's going to mean there are more single family homes on the market.
So, as you can imagine, an issue like this hasn't gone on for very long without Congress noticing. And some members of Congress are proposing placing limits on the number of homes an institutional investor can buy, or maybe even taxing them if they buy homes that then sit empty or aren't put to good use. The idea that they have is to try and discourage big companies from being in the housing market in the first place. But critics say proposals like this are actually a bad idea, and they'd also be incredibly hard to enforce. And let's take the idea of taxing vacant property for a second. It's hard to prove that a home is vacant. Here's a complex of homes in New York State, and what investors did was they actually scammed banks by making it look like these homes were occupied and lived in to inflate the amount of money the properties were earning when they were actually vacant. What they did was they had loud music on, they left TVs on, they put shoes and stuff outside of some of the apartments so that it looked like, hey, someone's home watching TV. They did it to obtain around $500 million in loans, all based on fraudulent data. And the other idea on the table is to have ownership caps for investors. Like, you can only own so many properties. Buy too many and you're going to get hit with fees and taxes to make you stop. And just like we have a progressive tax system in this country, owning too many properties would require progressively more and more taxes and fees to keep them. But that also might be tricky because big companies like this, they own other big companies. Let's take Google, for example. They own YouTube, they own Fitbit. If YouTube and Fitbit both own a bunch of apartments somewhere, who gets taxed? Do you add them together? Do you tax all three of them? The government would tax all five of them. But either way, critics say proposals like this could be very dangerous.
All kinds of different structures, including hedge funds, including private equity, including more speculative family offices got involved in real estate. And so to actually decide, well, I'm going to pick this source of funding over this one is not what the government should be doing. I don't care if they're Democrats, Republicans, whoever they are. Stay out of the markets. Let the markets be the markets.
Ah, Mr. Wonderful, Canadian capitalist.
I mean, think about this. The average home in America, single family home, according to this data, is $570K, $575K. People cannot afford starter homes anymore. I mean, it's out of control. And I'm telling you, and it is the wars, the constant wars, the $5 trillion that we spent over 20 years. It's the bad policy, the socialistic policy on both sides of the aisle, primarily though the Democratic Party, but the Republican Party screwed up too. It's amazing. This is the reason why New York and the United States is going to hell. And by the way, they can't even make a decent pizza anymore. Cutting corners on tomatoes and tomato paste and the cheese. I mean, everything, the quality of everything is going down. It's crazy.
O'Leary coming to the rescue of Blackstone. But he makes a point that many people, including myself, have never considered. And his point is, what if it's not the free market? That's the problem here. What if the free market is actually the best solution to this housing crunch? What if we don't need more government? And his point is that if there's a housing shortage in America, which there is, and prices get pushed up high enough, people are going to start building houses. People are going to say, you know what? I'm not making enough money as a professional TikToker. No, I could go back to college. I could do something else in my life. What if I want to make a lot of money? I could get some sticks and build homes because homes are so overpriced. I'll get rich if I do it. It sounds crazy. I don't want to live in a house built by a TikToker, unless it's built by the guy on TikTok who chops wood. But the point is that if Americans figure out they can make money by building houses for other Americans to live in, people will decide to do that for a living. And the end result will be that homes start getting built and that we have many more homes. And critics argue that massive companies like Blackstone buying homes because there's so much demand is just a symptom of a much larger problem. And if people figure out they can make money doing something, they're going to go and do it without anyone having to tell them to go and do it because it's an opportunity. And if you create an opportunity and that opportunity benefits society, society's going to be willing to pay for it. A lot of people are going to get into it. They're saying that this whole problem could end up fixing itself. Yes, near-term shortages are happening. Right now, there aren't enough homes for anybody. But if you stop anyone from being able to buy a home who wants to, even if it's a big company, now you're going to have less demand for homes, not more demand. We need more demand so that more homes get built. That's what this argument sounds like. And you know what's crazy? Wall Street, they can't buy enough homes, so they're actually building their own neighborhoods. Isn't that crazy? But they actually stand to save a lot of money doing this. Think about it. If you build a whole bunch of houses in one geographic location, you give them all the exact same kitchen, you give them all the exact same stove, same floors, zero variation, just soulless, ruthless, efficient construction. Although you'll wind up with houses that have as much style as a Big Four accounting firm, it's cheaper for these big companies to just build a whole bunch of homes to their spec all at once. Then they control the cost of everything. But granted, the idea of living in a mass-produced home,
well, this, you know, they're, you know, and Cash Jordan doesn't have the history of this, but this sort of has happened in the United States already, right? By SOM, which is a big architectural firm. And they just did these mass unit build out for lower income and has somewhat changed the landscape. And this was taking place in around the 70s in New York. All right. And you had other regions that were doing this that were inner city regions. So you kind of have, you've already seen this happen, and those areas that these things are built in aren't, they eventually decay. So you have crime, and you have you have people on drugs, and it's just, you have instability with home life. It's not a very good environment for these kids. So this SOM concept that happened in the 70s and I think the late 60s, but definitely in the 70s, was a failure. So you're probably going to have another failure if you do this. And not just that, the need for certain types of workers in certain regions of the country has changed because of technology. We don't need as many workers on the line because of robotics. Well, we're not going to need as many office employees either because of artificial intelligence. So the whole composition of the workforce is changing. The supply and the demand of the workforce in the short term is in disequilibrium. You have more supply of workers, but the demand is going down because of AI. Well, economics is economics, and that's there's economic laws that happen, right? And my concern is that when you decouple labor and capital because of artificial intelligence, and you mass introduce this into the society, that it's going to cause so much disruption that it's going to gut the middle class and cause a lot of financial turmoil, especially at the personal indebtedness level, but also in the sovereign bond market. The United States government is heavily in debt, but it can float because people think that the individuals in the country will be able to pay the coupon payment, to pay the interest payments through taxation, through productivity, through working. But when that starts to have a problem, who's going to be paying the taxes? Who's going to be paying the interest on these bonds? R2D2? C3PO? I don't think so.
Operates like McDonald's. That doesn't sound.
Another thing that
but if you look at
hit with my head here when he was talking about this soulless design, this is the Bauhaus movement that was going on in the 1920s. So not only did we see SOM happen in the 70s in New York, but you had a Bauhaus movement that was happening in Germany, and some of that design ethos came to America from the 20s, where it was about efficiency. So this argument, you know, about what to do in these kinds of situations goes all the way back to the Bauhaus movement.
typical $1 million box apartment in New York City. It might have an inspiring view, but the inside is just a white box. So on one hand, we've got people saying the government should step in and kick these companies out of the housing market. On the other hand, people are saying, hey, just let the market do its thing, it'll all work out. What do you think the right answer to this is? Let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.
Yes, Jordan, the only way out of this, trust me, because my family goes back pretty far in American history. The only way out of this is revolution. Because your government isn't going to give a shit. Wall Street's not going to give a shit. And unless the American citizen actually steps up to the plate and says, don't tread on me, this stuff that's going on isn't going to stop. Talk is cheap. Action is what is needed. And guess what? The American public didn't act when they needed to in 2020. And now you have all the aftershock of the crisis, the pathologies that are starting to pop up. We don't have to go into detail because I've done it with thousands of hours of talking about the crisis, literally thousands of hours about talking about the crisis, where you had American citizens not doing the right thing and shutting down certain facilities that should have been shut down, and be more forceful with the government on truncating certain agencies, 3-letter agencies that start with C and end with A and have a middle letter I. All right, let's take a look at what else is going on in New York.
Today, over 2 million packages will get delivered here in New York City, but 90,000 of them are going to get stolen. That's a big problem, but the city's got a new plan to stop people from stealing packages without having to arrest anyone. How is that going to work? 90,000 packages in the city are lost or stolen every day.
And if you have the bad luck of having one of your packages taken, you know just how frustrating it could be.
The NYPD says this Amazon employee walked right up these steps right here and picked up packages that were already on the porch.
Victims stand to lose more than birthday cards and paychecks.
I have a neighbor whose insulin was stolen. We had ordered a couple of brand new iPhone 15s.
More victims have reached out from Jamaica to Bayside. They say the post office didn't offer fraud protection or even give word their mail was gone.
Okay, so 90,000 packages a day. When I saw this headline, I thought it was fake news, but apparently package theft in New York is on the rise, and it's not showing any signs of slowing down. And that makes sense. Since 2020, online shopping is way up, and sadly, in-store shoplifting is also way up since then. And that's why when you go to a drugstore, pretty much everything is locked up behind the glass. But the problem for New York...
And that didn't happen until you had the BLM movement and the rioting that took place. Thank you so much, citizen in the United States that can't pull up your pants, can't make your bed, but you have to go to the drugstore and steal Gillette razors. Thank you so much. And oh, by the way, your constituency wants to actually push reparations in state legislature. So it taxes individuals because there must be some sort of structural racism. How about pulling up your pants, making your bed, brushing your teeth, and getting a job, and don't steal from Walgreens?
Porch pirates have figured out they can get something way more valuable than a jug of Tide detergent, and that's because the packages getting delivered to apartments can be potentially way more valuable. Sometimes you hit the jackpot, other times it's a nose hair trimmer. But over the last few months, the city's been rolling out a plan to combat these insane levels of package theft using publicly accessible lockers that anyone can get to 24 hours a day, anyone, including potential package thieves. But not only are we going to go over this crime-proof locker program and see if these machines are actually going to protect your stuff, we're also going to see what you can do to prevent package theft the old-fashioned way, which still kind of works. But first, it's important to understand that package theft has gotten so bad that
I think package theft is actually down in Texas because everyone is walking around like Yosemite Sam. I'm telling you, America, you better wake up.
criminals are now upping the ante and stealing things like mail directly from the post office. This has got residents frustrated, people upset, and the U.S. Department of Transportation estimates that 33 million packages a year are stolen across the entire country. They get stolen from porches, unattended lobbies, and apartment entryways. And the thing about New York that compounds this problem is most people here live in an old building that doesn't really have any security whatsoever. And even in buildings that have security, sometimes the doorman goes out to lunch. On top of that, the average household in the city gets one delivery every single week, and 20% of households get 4 or more deliveries every single week.
So, you know, here's the problem, especially in New York. Not everyone has kind of a doorman or a lobby, right, where they're checking in packages. Many people are in walk-ups, so the packages may be right at the steps behind the door. So if someone opens up the door or breaks the door, they could easily take your packages. And many people in New York live with walk-ups. They don't have a doorman. They don't have a lobby. They don't have a concierge. Now, some of the more affluent individuals, or some of the more luxurious areas, they do have that. But the problem is that we have a society that feels as though they have to steal or they can steal. And we have mayors in these cities, because we're talking about inner city here. So a lot of these mayors are Democrat mayors. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. And they're not willing to prosecute. You see constantly these people going into Apple or going into a high-end luxury store and stealing stuff off the shelf or off the table. Sometimes they get caught, sometimes not. Sometimes they're prosecuted because they've taken $5,000 worth of merchandise, but there's a cap where if they take the merchandise under a certain value, I think it's $900. It could have changed since, you know, I've read this, but, you know, some cap, if it's underneath the cap, they don't get prosecuted. So here, this is a major problem, and it escalates. It's not just stealing items. There's shootings, and there's the drug problem, and then there is the poor home life, and, you know, and the instability. I'll tell you, America is failing is failing. You have a society that can't pull up their pants, and you have a society that can't make pizza correctly. Now, let me play. I saw this on X this morning, and this, in a nutshell, explains exactly the problem in New York with illegal immigration and the stress that it's causing in the society and with its citizens that are paying taxes. Okay? So I'm going to play this. I'm going to play this. It is, you can tell this person's a real New Yorker, all right? That's tired of it.
Not legal. If they were legal, they need to pay taxes.
What do you think's gonna happen with migrant crisis here in New York City?
It's getting bad because they're also next to my house and they piss on my door. I could tell that they're gang lords. I mean, they're tattooed up to head to toe. The people pissing on my door, they're tattooed up head to toe. And there's no law against illegal migrants committing crimes. So again, it's lawlessness, non-payment of taxes, siphoning all our money to their native countries, and it's just killing our economy. Eric Adams just said he's going to give 4,000 migrants jobs. That means 4,000 civilians have less jobs. That's just not fair to Americans. It's getting scary. Right now, people in the Bronx are getting attacked. People Upper East Side, 2 of them just got attacked, and it's illegal to buy mace. It's illegal to protect yourself. Not legal. If they were legal, they need to.
So that was some guy interviewing a person in New York City. All right. Probably is a YouTuber. I don't know him. I don't know the female that he was interviewing. But I do know this. New York City is getting stressed, and I am assuming that other cities are also getting stressed that have similar dynamics, like LA, like San Francisco, like Chicago, like Detroit, like Boston. There's too many drugs running around. There's too many people that can't pull up their pants. There's too many people that view the family unit in a negative light. They view the country in a negative light, and they view God in a negative light. And if we don't push back, we'll never have good pizza. And we're going to have a society that is just constantly failing, and it's just a downward spiral. I mean, think about it. Let's say you're in a walk-up. It sounds like she has a walk-up, all right? And you go outside, right? And you're about ready to go to work, and you step in feces because you have an immigrant that's defecating on your steps, or peeing on your door. Welcome to New York. This is what's happening. You won't hear this on MSNBC. You won't hear this on CNN. There is literally a takeover that's happening to our country. And then you add in insult to injury when you have these 2 illegal immigrants that attacked police officers in New York City and got away with it. They were let go.
Is such a problem in New York as people find less and less of what they want in stock, or frustratingly in stock, but behind a locked cabinet or refrigerator. That number of people who get more than 1 delivery a week is only going to increase. Look at this beauty aisle.
Yeah.
Glass.
Just imagine you're buying almonds and you have to hit a button and have one of the representatives at Walgreens come in and unlock it so you can have your can of almonds or bag of Doritos. Or let's say a female needed to get some mascara. Well, you got to press the button and get some help because it's behind a glass, locked. The Black community caused that. No one wants to say it, but that's exactly what happened. And it was the BLM movement when they were rioting that set this thing in motion.
little area is all you can get to. It's a downward spiral as more and more stuff gets locked up to keep it from getting stolen. The in-store experience just gets more frustrating. Right. More deliveries will go online, and that's where the package thieves come in. And as you're about to see, the way New Yorkers are stuck living in these tiny little apartments, it's
100% right. 100% right on that.
It's us the perfect target for criminals.
Get up to 6 accounts per household and unlimited DVR space included with YouTube TV. Try it free.
Why make Sergey, you know, the two guys that started Google, more rich by doing a subscription on YouTube? Why? They're already billionaires. See, wake up, America. Corporate wants to make sure that they get more percentage of your paycheck on a regular basis through subscriptions, through things that you really don't need. Focus on things that you really do need. Challenge your brain. Get healthy. Try to improve your relationship with God. Try to improve your relationship with your country. Try to improve your relationship with your family, because these things really matter, and they are cornerstones of society. Not subscriptions to Apple Plus TV or YouTube TV. You don't need it. And why? Why should people make Tim Cook even more wealthy so he can promote homosexuality?
Now, the biggest problem with New York when it comes to package theft is these apartments. They are the problem. The city's got over 8 million residents, all living in tiny little box apartments right next to each other. This window right here is one entire apartment right next to the front door. And because you got a lot of apartments, and because they're all very tiny, you've got to understand that the people living in places like this, they're not staying here for decades on end. A lot of people will rent a place and they'll be there for 1 year, maybe 2 years, and then they move out, which means if a criminal is consistently robbed.
Exactly. There's a transientness that makes a society less stable. And if you erode country, you erode God, and you erode family, you're just a nomad. What do you really, I mean, when you start getting older and you look back on your life, if you're just a nomad, what the hell do you really have other than a knapsack and maybe a sleeping bag? You got to build memory. You have to have scratches on your table, you know, and you know, because of family get-togethers during the holidays, and these things build memory, and they're part of a healthy person. If you don't have that, if you don't have that in your life and build up that kind of memory bank, and you're a nomad that's just being a you know, a subscriber to, you know, the latest and greatest technology, you're not going to be really human. And when you get older, you're going to regret most of your life.
Same building, they're gonna have new victims every single month. And once those people finally figure out what's happened, they're gonna move out and get replaced by somebody else. And since penalties for stealing in New York are relatively light, critics would say that there aren't a lot of consequences in place to deter what we're about to witness.
Go ahead and take a look at this video, because this is surveillance video. They say it captured the female Amazon worker getting out of an Amazon truck to deliver packages, but then she ended up taking packages that were already at the doorstep. And then once she was back at the company.
Okay, I guess it just adds insult to injury when the person walking up your steps to deliver your package is also the person who intends on stealing it. And what's crazy is even when the package thief isn't the person delivering the package, apartment buildings typically get their deliveries around the same time every single day. And the problem is if a criminal knows when packages get delivered, they know when to be there to pick them up before the residents. But if a thief gets into a building like this and there's packages in the lobby, how do they know for sure that what they're stealing will have value to them? Like, what if the thing that they end up taking is something they can't use? What do?
We got an email from the original store that we ordered the items,
that it was returned to their store, and an electronic gift card was issued to whoever returned it.
So they got the gift card.
Wait a minute. You go steal an item on the street of New York. You don't like what you stole. You return it to Amazon and you get a gift card back. Thanks, Jeff Bezos. Now I understand why the New World Order loves you so much, and you have these $35 or $50 million yachts.
So thief steals a package. It's an expensive dress for a wedding. And what do? They contact the dress company, they return it and get store credit. That's vicious. Oh, now, of course, with Amazon, it's considerably harder to do this because if you want to return something, it's connected to your account. But sadly, in this city, criminals have figured out they can sell pretty much anything on the street if the price is low enough. This is either stuff that wasn't locked up in a drugstore or stuff that was delivered in a package. And since penalties for theft in this city are so slim, thieves are upping the ante and stealing actual mail.
So the problem isn't so much Amazon. The problem isn't so much Amazon. So I was wrong on that. See, I'll admit when I'm wrong. All right, I'm not wrong often. But okay, so I was wrong with Amazon, but they're still sending it back, to retailers to get a gift card. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, and they want to take your gun rights away.
They don't seem to care, and that's why residents have been begging the city to do something.
Same pair of green mailboxes on our corner has been targeted yet again. We first brought you the explosive video this summer showing multiple mid-afternoon thefts on 23rd Avenue and 21st Street.
Okay, so it seems like they're not robbing the trucks, at least not yet anyways. They're going after these relay boxes. U.S. mail, storage box. There's a little keyhole right here. To be honest with you, I didn't think these were still used for anything. But apparently there's mail in there. And residents are sending letters places and they're not showing up. And if you see over here, we've got the postal carrier. They probably need to access these boxes when they have too much mail in their little cart. And with all the tiny apartments around here, just think of how much mail is inside these versus in other parts of the country. Again, criminals' paradise. It's horrible to say that, but it's true. But hopefully this is something the new lockers can prevent. Either way, the people that are robbing these, they might employ some of the same tactics to get into the lockers. We'll have to see. One guy was dressed up as a postal worker. And it makes sense that residents are terrified and upset.
Identity theft is also top of mind. More victims have reached out from Jamaica to Bayside. They say the post office didn't offer fraud protection or even give word their mail was gone.
We recommend dropping it off directly to the post office. Wow, it's crazy how there's just zero accountability from the post office. They're like, yeah, mail got stolen. What can you do about it? And in today's day and age, if your personal information falls into the wrong hands, it can be devastating financially.
Now all eyes are on the green boxes and their vulnerable locks. USPS will be installing 49,000 electronic locks to replace traditional postal keys.
That might work, but a criminal might be able to wedge something in here and just pry this thing open. Or if it rusts enough, they can just reach in there and take what they want without even picking the lock. But now that we know how bad the problem is of package theft and mail theft here in the city, let's go see what the new solution looks like a few months after it's been in operation. Is it working?
More than just beautiful dance. It's a touch of the divine.
This is pretty cool. And it's essentially just a little room full of Amazon lockers, except they're not Amazon lockers. They're called Go lockers. These things seem pretty secure. There's no way to get these open. No way. They've got to pop open from the machine. And even though this place is completely unmonitored by any person, I had to download this app and give it all my personal information and tell it I had a package with a valid tracking number just to open the door and get in. And what that essentially means is anybody who opens the front door, there's a record of who they are, what time they came in, and there's a little camera right up there that's watching. So they know exactly who you are if you come in here and do anything.
Here's the
stupid.
problem.
Unless an
Here's the
enterprise-
problem. And I've seen it happen in New York. Some of these thieves will be behind you, right? And they'll try to get in by just riding your coattails into the lobby. So you have access to the door, but they don't, and they'll just try to rush in while you're going in. And that camera ain't gonna stop a theft. You know, so this is because there's no one there as security, the chances of someone being attacked increases. Or wait outside when the person is leaving with their package and then mug them. This is the problem when you don't have a society that is God, country, and family. It's lawless. But we'll pay more attention on the NFL and Taylor Swift than what the hell the Federal Reserve is doing and how they're destroying your monetary base and your way of life. Ask the average guy, what was the score for the football for the Super Bowl? I bet they'll be able to tell you between the Chiefs and the 49ers. Or if they don't know the score, at least who won. And then ask the question, what's the unemployment rate in the United States and what's the Federal Reserve prime rate right now? The Federal Reserve rate. I bet they wouldn't be able to tell you. That's a problem. That's a big problem. A lot of stupid asses out there.
Hooligan decides to bypass the old school lock. But even then, what's the guarantee one of these has a package waiting to go out or waiting to get picked up? You would literally have to read every single one of these things, and they're pretty tough to open. So I don't think criminals are going to be interested in this. And the cool thing is, you can find these in more places than just this little storefront.
Imagine if you could grab a bit.
Cash Jordan, you're wrong. They'll wait outside or rush in while the door hasn't closed. No one's going to stop them. A little camera isn't going to stop them. 90% of these criminals are wearing masks. Brought to you by CDC.
From one of your favorite spots, or grab a carton of milk, and then pick up a package. It's a win-win for both of us. At Old Brooklyn Bagel Shop in Park Slope, you can knock out those two birds with one stone.
No, what's cool about that, even though it's different than where we are now, which is an off-site suite, part of the pilot program, having one of these in like a deli or a grocery store or a place that busy New Yorkers have to go anyways, maybe even in the subway, that would be great because now it saves you a ton of time and you know that your stuff is inside one of the lockers waiting for you.
When the customers come in.
No, the bigger issue, Cash Jordan, is there's people around, so it reduces the chances of being mugged. You know, he's young, but you know, a little naive at times.
There you go. It's called Go Locker, a way to combat those porch pirates, because if being caught on camera won't stop them, maybe this will. There are a handful of them in bodegas, malls, and convenience stores throughout the 5 boroughs, and 2 standalone locations with 24-hour access.
And you know what's interesting about this is you keep hearing about how online shopping is the death of like retail stores and storefronts, but if you put these in retail stores and storefronts, now people have a reason to go to those and do business, which wouldn't happen before. It's better for businesses, it's better for customers. Very interesting. I thought this was going to be a stupid idea, but so far so good. And look at that horrible apartment building across the street. That place probably gets robbed every 5 minutes. But now the people living there can pay their landlord $5,000 a month for a tiny little apartment because they got this across the street. Isn't that great? New York's back, baby. Now the cool thing is these are actually free.
I think he was being facetious there.
For New York City residents, typically GoLocker charges a fee for you to use these, but since they launched this last summer, they've been opening up about 15 of these standalone locations. And instead of billing the customers, GoLocker has some deal worked out with UPS, FedEx to get them to pay to drop stuff off here. It says in their press release that the goal is to reduce the number of trips package delivery companies have to make. That would probably save them money.
The membership through the pilot is free, with mail carriers covering the cost. 90,000 packages in the city are lost or stolen every day, and that's all driving up costs.
Which gets passed back onto the consumer. So relatively, you're still paying for it, maybe not directly.
You just said that.
So the interesting thing about this is, unlike Amazon that has their own locker system and their own delivery service, UPS, FedEx, DHL, any carrier, they don't have any of that stuff. And they need a system like this in order to offer people the same convenience and make sure their stuff doesn't get jacked. And this is really secure. You can't do anything without a code or something. If you want to pick something up, boom, you got to scan it, and then it'll tell you which locker. So there's no way to know right now which lockers have stuff in them and which ones don't. But the thing that's kind of worrisome about this is, let's say you have something very valuable in here, and you come here late at night. I don't know if there's weirdos or something hanging out across the street. It's not really any privacy. You can totally see what people are doing inside here, so that could be a security risk. But what if you've got something really big and heavy like a flat screen TV? That's not going to fit in one of these lockers. What do you do with it? There's no way you're going to fit anything of substance in here that's not like a square or rectangle type thing. And what that essentially means is, although this might be convenient for very small things like a nose hair trimmer or like an Apple iPad or something, if it's big, it's still going to have to go to your apartment. And that means it could still end up getting stolen. But now let's see what you can do to stop package theft in your apartment.
Before we do that, I have to do a commercial for PNN. I have these anti-aging boxes that I've curated. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get one of the curated anti-aging boxes to help improve your health. The two boxes that I want to focus on in this video is what I call the anti-Fauci box. I have a beginner's box and an advanced anti-Fauci box. In the beginner's box, you get Health Max 35, which is a structural nanosilver liquid. You take a teaspoon of it a day. If you're not feeling well, take 1 or 2 tablespoons a day, and that will neutralize pathogens. You swish it in your mouth, you gargle with it, you swallow it. You also get magnesium and zinc to help boost up your immune system. You get D3, which helps to absorb calcium. It also helps with gene expression. It's a gene expression cofactor, very important. And it's very important to help with apoptosis with infected cells. And in the beginner's box, you also get 2 supplements that help bring down inflammation. The first supplement is ashwagandha root, which helps to control blood glucose levels and, your stress response, for adrenal health. And by doing that, you're reducing that pro-inflammatory response, and you're bringing down that inflammation, especially with controlling the blood glucose levels. And you get also the turmeric. All right. This is an antioxidant, and it also brings down inflammation. It brings down the pro-inflammatory cytokines. By doing that, you're bringing down the inflammation. You have the gene expression. You have the apoptosis that if the cell is infected, and you're neutralizing pathogens. All right, that's the beginner's box, the anti-Fauci beginner's box. That goes for $200 on my store. You get very high quality supplements for those $200. For additional $60, in the advanced box, you can pick either a 2-ounce C60 coconut or a 2-ounce C60 avocado. This is a very strong antioxidant. You take a dropper of this a day, and this will help to bring down that free radical load that's in the cell, reduce that cellular stress, improve the mitochondria that's in the cell, and boost up your ATP, because your mitochondria will be healthier. When you have more ATP, you're going to have more energy, because the main energy source in our body, it's not the only, but the main energy source is ATP. If you have good working cells, with less stress, less free radical stress, then you are going to slow down the aging process and have more energy. You need energy for a good immune system. But not just that, this box will slow down that aging process if you take it every day. There's a compound effect. If you don't believe me, try it out for a month or two. And you'll start to see that there's huge improvements. You take C60 right before a workout, right? You'll recover quicker. Why? Because it's soaking up the free radicals that are created while you're working out. So, and the Max 35 neutralizes pathogens because it's a structural nanosilver liquid. You bring down inflammation. A lot of people in the United States is chronically inflamed because of their diet and chronically inflamed because of their lifestyle. So the anti-Fauci beginner's box is $200, and the advanced box, you can pick either coconut C60 2-ounce, coconut C60 2-ounce or coconut avocado C60 2-ounce, either or, all right? And that goes for $260. You will be amazed at the quality of the products that I offer, and that the synergistic aspect of neutralizing pathogens, bringing down inflammation, and neutralizing free radicals. So you can get it at $200 or or $260. If that's too pricey and you just want individual items, you can buy the individual items on my store also. But there is a benefit if you take these things together on a regular basis. You're going to improve your immune system, and you're going to slow down the aging process. This is PNN. Let's go back to how New York is going straight to hell.
Okay, so what?
Oh, no. Kind of old spice. You can use it on your pit's chest and even your...
Okay, so the thing that I like the most about this is that this building has a long, narrow hallway. Look at how far it is from the front door over to where this package is. It's also very well lit, very clean, and nobody who's out on the street will be able to see any of the packages that get delivered because they're brought over here by the mailboxes. And before we talk about other tips that might work, a clean, bright, well cared for building is the first step. Let's say you had a building where the front door was literally right here next to the packages. Somebody could just look inside, see something, decide to get in, take it. And also, you see how there are no packages here? It goes without saying that if your stuff is all over the floor for multiple days on end, it could be inadvertently taken by a neighbor who thinks it's theirs. Somebody could see it, maybe on their way out of the building, maybe another delivery person by chance. But in addition to your apartment right here, there are 19 other apartments, and you guys can team up to keep an eye out for each other and make sure that you don't take somebody else's stuff. They don't take yours. And if the person across the hall has a package, just let them know, hey, you got a package. Or you can put it in front of their door.
I want to take a look at some of the figures on how people plan to prevent package theft. 32% are going to use package tracking technology. 21% will be relying on home security cameras. And 19% will be asking a neighbor to watch the house or collect packages for them.
Okay, so according to the news,
see, back in the olden days, you could trust your neighbor. You didn't have to lock your door. And if you had a problem, it was either, the solution was either a Glock or Smith & Wesson or a Colt. But nowadays, you know, you can't even fight the criminal anymore because they'll sue you.
Have a home security system that can keep an eye on their porch and on their front door. Here you can do that because we're ground floor and you could have a little camera that shows you what's going on out there. But even while a little doorbell type camera here might be somewhat helpful, some buildings are starting to put in things like Amazon lockers where they might have empty space, but there's not a whole lot of empty space here, so I don't think that's coming. And if you do live in a place where a package goes missing, if that happens, tell the landlord and leave a note in the area where the package was taken from. That way somebody might see the note and return it because they grabbed it by accident. In my particular building, the super had a new cleaning person take their place, and there were a bunch of packages in the lobby. And you know what they did? They brought them all down to the basement. Everybody thought their stuff got stolen just because it was missing. So it can also be something very similar, but had those packages been picked up as soon as they were dropped off, nobody would have had to deal with any of that confusion. What do you think the best tip is for package theft? Do you think New York City's on the right track with these lockers? Should they expand them? Should they get rid of them? Are criminals going to start robbing them? Or are we get
Second Amendment. Really simple. Have a district attorney that actually prosecutes these criminals, and don't have a pussy mayor like Mayor Adams. That's the solution, Cash Jordan. All right. Let's also look at what other crazy stuff is happening in New York. Oh, this is lovely.
So we've seen a spate of some very brazen cell phone robberies in New York City that's been attributed to a Venezuelan gang called Tren de Aragua, which has its origins at a prison outside of Caracas. The number of the gang members escaped in September 2023 when the Venezuelan government raided the prison. And a lot of them have come over within this surge of migrants from Venezuela into the United States. In the last fiscal year, there have been like 340,000 encounters at the US southern border with Venezuelan migrants. Among those, Border Patrol has apprehended 41 Tren de Aragua gang members. Law enforcement says they are infiltrating cities in the United States and maybe forming alliances with gangs that are already established here. We're seeing the presence of Tren de Aragua in New York City. We're seeing all these brazen cell phone robberies where two guys on a moped will go onto a sidewalk in Manhattan and they will steal a cell phone out of the hands of somebody who's actually talking on the phone. This is important because if you're talking on the phone, your phone is open. So the guy on the back of the scooter just keeps tapping the phone so that all of your apps are open, and then they take it back to a gang leader in the Bronx.
This is why it's so important that if you're in the city, you know, you have that phone in your pocket, you have the earbuds in, and you're, you know, if you're talking on the phone, you talk through the earbuds, and keep that phone away from you. Put it in a pocket, maybe even in the jacket pocket instead of, you know, outer pocket. But I'll tell you, you know, but it's not just I didn't know about this gang, this whatever it's called, whatever she called it. That's news to me. But the thing is this, it's also people getting pushed onto the railroad tracks and getting run over by the train. I mean, that happens not every day, but it happens regularly throughout the year. Now, some of them are suicides, but many of them are shoves. I mean, it's crazy. You know, this is a problem. You have a society that doesn't respect property, ownership, or life.
Goes through and drains people's bank accounts. The phones are then bundled up and sent to Colombia where they're resold. So it's suddenly a big mess.
Well, let's see what the former NYPD commissioner has to say.
We got a favorite thing about the XS1? So many. If we can maybe narrow down to 3, it's gonna be hard to
You know,
do.
I'm not going to tell people not to go to the gym. You should do exercising, but don't get too crazy. All right. Some people, they buy all this equipment for their house. They may use it for a few months. Maybe if they're really into weightlifting, they'll use it throughout the year. But usually it's just a waste of space and a waste of money. You can do almost any of these exercises that are resistant exercises by doing isometrics. And that's basically using your natural body and gravity to build muscle. The Army does it in their calisthenic program. And, you know, they're pretty fit. All right. You can be a gymnast by doing this and not have to lift weights. And not only that, when you're doing these isometrics, you are actually improving not just your strength, but you're also improving your stretching, because parts of these routines are stretching and balancing. So don't get too crazy. You don't have to. You can do all of that for free and be fit. Now, you may not look like Hulk Hogan. You may not look like, you know, Andre the Giant for the WWF or Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you'll be healthier, because Arnold Schwarzenegger had problems with his heart because he was a weightlifter. Not that, he also took steroids, but I mean, just over weightlifting will do damage to your heart because you're increasing your blood pressure. So, you know, just do it in moderation and you'll be fitter. You will have better health. You got all these people that go, no, I got to buy a gym and I got to get this fancy screen on the wall and, you know, it's going to tell me what to do. You don't need that. You can get a PDF file or watch one video on YouTube on isometrics, and you'd be fitter than these people that are using this crap, that's using a machine that costs $3 grand. Don't waste your money.
On me right now is former New York City Police Commissioner. He is the CEO of Guardian Group, Ray Kelly, back with us. And Commissioner, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks very much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Maria.
So what did you make of all of this? I mean, it's heartbreaking to see these illegal migrants beating up our NYPD officers. How should the U.S. and the city of New York be dealing with this?
Well, obviously, we need a lot of help at the border. That's where these people are coming from. The police commissioner of New York last week said that the city is awash in a wave of migrant crime, and certainly seems to be the case. I know there's one gang in particular that they've talked about, that they've written about, and that is Trin de Peacock. And they're from Venezuela, but they've been around for about 12 years, and they've done this type of thing, the robberies, the phone snatchers in South America for over 12 years. They've taken that whole operation, moved it to New York, and the cops are overwhelmed, quite frankly. The police department is short of police officers, no question about it.
Well, you know the phrase, if you can, you know the phrase, if you can do it, you know, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. I guess maybe we should rephrase it. If you can make it in Venezuela, you can make it anywhere.
So it's a very difficult time to be a cop in New York City these days.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
I don't see it getting any better anytime soon.
Well, especially,
frankly, we saw this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm
No,
sorry.
no, please continue.
So I'm going to say we saw District Attorney Bragg let people go without bail. There's no reason to do that. They had no addresses. They had no roots in the community. Yet he let them go, and they went all across the country. So it's very frustrating for the cops as well. And of course, everyone has to be on their toes. You have to be alert. You better be looking around, because you can be the victim of these crimes very easily.
I'll tell you what, stop being a victim and start being a vigilante. That's where this is going. If your government can't stop this, and you need to protect your family and protect your own life, vigilante justice is probably going to be in order. The government's failing you, but they'll still take your taxes.
They're using fleet-footed young men to take persons, and it's not ending anytime soon, unfortunately.
It's unbelievable. We see a lot of people with masks on riding scooters in New York City. I see it all the time. And this Venezuelan gang has it down to a science, stealing people's phones if you're holding your phone or purses. What else can you tell us about this Venezuelan gang, Commissioner?
Well, we know that they're established in several South American countries, and they've been there for a while, say for at least 12 years. They've only fairly recently moved to New York. but they moved that whole operation. They moved their MO of stealing phones, sending them back to Colombia, having them cleansed, and
Here's a great idea. Why don't we get Jocko, the SEAL team guy, retired, go down in Venezuela and show his chops with all that training that we gave him and all that money that we send to the SEAL teams and get the job done. Do some operation, Jocko, instead of doing a podcast and collecting a pension and not willing to say anything about the nefarious stuff that was going on in 2020. Or what about what happened during both election cycles in the general election in 2016 and 2020? Jocko. No, you don't want to say anything because you don't want to tip the apple cart for your retirement from the military.
They made a lot of money off of that through the years, and it looks like they're making money here in New York. Plus, they're stealing bags from women riding on scooters that they'll pull up next to them, take the bag, take off, and they're gone in a flash. So those are the two kind of primary ways that they've been making money in the city. But they also are involved in human trafficking and drugs. So they're probably likely to expand than to curtail what they're doing now. So it's a real problem for the city and for the police department.
And the NYPD is telling us, and the FBI is telling us to beware of these certain tattoos that these gang members have, indicating that they're part of the gang. Is there anything else that average citizens, Ray, should be doing?
I'm telling you, vigilante justice in this case is justified. And you take them out. And you just leave them dead on the street corner. And because they only understand violence, you give them violence, and then they'll stop.
So that they don't fall victim to this.
Yeah, they have to look over their shoulder. They're going to be aware of their surroundings. They have to be aware if they're on darkened streets. If you look at the Roosevelt Hotel, which is sort of the center for migrants in the city these days, there's scooters all around that hotel. They're readily available for them to go and do
I've seen that.
and do their crime.
I've seen these scooters, and I did one video, and just it was buried in what I don't know the episode. It was probably Graveyard Shift, one of the episodes in Graveyard Shift. And inside the video, I was mentioning how I was walking past the Roosevelt hotel, and there was all these scooters that I didn't understand why there were these scooters right in front of the hotel. Never seen it before, and that was where these immigrants were staying at the hotel. So, now we have this story that, and I probably did that video in probably the late summer, which was the Graveyard Shift series. So I have seen the scooters that he's talking about. But, the problem here is that we need citizens that aren't defensive, but are offensive against these gangs. All right. Let me give you a story that no one has heard before. All right. My uncle was in the hardware business. He owned a couple True Value hardware stores back in the 70s and in the 80s. He died young on a racquetball court with his best friend, who was a cardiologist. So he was my uncle was serving on the racquetball court, and his heart gave out, and he passed away. So he passed away at age 46. All right, and he was kind of like some relatives are like an anchor for the whole family. He was one of those kind of relatives. All the holidays, were at his house. All the big holidays were at his house. All the, distant relatives would, come over maybe twice a year, and it would be a big gathering. So he was that kind of patriarch, right? When he died, then, there was kind of a fracturing of more of the distance relatives, and there wasn't really a gravitational force for some of these holidays. So everyone was kind of like with their own immediate family, right? After his passing. But to get to the point, he had a store in Detroit in the 70s and the early 80s, a true value store, right? So, he sold a lot of, construction kind of material, right? Back in that day, it was before Home Depot and Lowe's. So you had these individual hardware stores. So anyone that had to fix something, at their house, or paint, or do some sort of gardening, or snow blowing during the winter, or lawnmowers. That's where you go to get these kinds of stuff. So he had a pretty big store, and a large inventory. But he would be, because it was in Detroit, there would be individuals that would come in and break into the store at night and steal items, like snow blowers and stuff like this. Well, and sometimes they would even steal during the day and raid the cash register. Back then it wasn't electronic. It was almost like key, and these old, for the ones that are my age and older, they know what I'm talking about. Just you hit a button up on the top, and then the little price tag would pop up, in the screen, like a glass screen. Little price tag would pop up, and the cost as you're adding the items, as you're tallying up the price of the items for that customer. And then you'd hit a button, and then the cash register would open up, and you'd pull out the cash, right? And the cash was held down with like a spring, a metal spring, right? But it would be easy to steal, right, from the cash register, especially right in the middle of giving money to a customer, closing out the order at the counter. So my other uncle, used to work for the uncle that owned the store, and the younger uncle used to be a football player, and he was extremely muscular, and he was a big guy, all right. And he literally, when these things would happen, so a black guy would come in, try to steal from the cash register. He would be at the register, or because he had managerial duties for the store. He may be in that area. He would take a baseball bat and chase them down the street and beat them. That's how you handle theft in Detroit back in the 70s and the 80s. And that's where citizens need to start handling the problems that we're seeing in New York, in Chicago, in Los Angeles. Now, not everyone is an ex-football player, right? But the point here is, don't be defensive, be offensive. And when you beat the hell out of them with a baseball bat, they don't come back. But if you're timid, they'll continue doing it. Now, that's how Detroiters handle problems. And I think New Yorkers are, a bunch of wusses now. And they need to find ways where they stop the crime, because the police aren't stopping it. The mayor's not stopping it. The DA's not stopping it. The criminal justice system's not stopping it. So who's going to stop it? It's going to be the citizen. So that's how they handled it in the 70s and the 80s in Detroit. If you owned a store and you stole from it, you would be chased by a baseball bat by the owner. You
have to be alert. It's a dangerous time, unfortunately, in in New York City, particularly in Midtown.
But who's giving them the scooters? How are they getting access to this stuff? I heard a story the other day that in the Apple store, a family of migrants came into the Apple store and they wanted to buy 5 iPads and 5 phones, and they wanted to buy the Apple 15 phone, and they paid for it with this card that they had. Is the city issuing those cards?
Well, they have some established people who are here. For instance, this Tunde Apika, they've been here. They have sort of a core group of people here. But now the migrants came in large numbers, and they're using them. So they're not exactly newcomers. They've been here. They've been established. They've been established. They've been here. They've been established. They've been established in other countries, and all indications are they're expanding their operations. Unfortunately, so they have money and they have roots here.
Unbelievable. The New York Post editorial board writes this: the documented presence of the brutal Venezuelan gang embedded among migrants in the Big Apple demands that lawmakers repeal state and local laws that stop the NYPD from teaming up with its federal immigration counterparts to take these criminals down. Ray, what can be done in terms of giving the NYPD more power to take down these groups?
Exactly what said there. They join with ICE. ICE is a very powerful federal agency, but this is a sanctuary city. New York is, so they're not dealing with ICE. It's really cutting off your nose to spite your face. It makes no sense in doing those sorts of things. But the city government,
we're a sanctuary city that doesn't have the money, and not only that, the crime is going up, and we're not willing to prosecute. And we're being taken over just like London. That mass immigration that happened in the UK, especially in London, and how London has been taken over. That's what's happening in New York. It's just the beginnings of it. Now, what are we going to do? Because unfortunately, a lot of people in New York are a bunch of pussies. It's not like flyover country. You got a lot of people that are timid. You got a lot of people that aren't willing to, do the right thing. They think they can, just maybe if they ignore it, they'll go away. It won't happen to them. It'll happen to the person behind them, maybe the person in front of them, but it didn't happen to them. Very egocentric. We need some people that have balls. Take a lesson from the 1970s and the 1980s and buy a baseball bat. Preferably a wooden baseball bat.
Do it. They still keep New York as a sanctuary city. They're fooling around with it in the courts, but still, New York is considered a sanctuary city. So, yes, we need the federal government. We need the federal government's help. We need the federal agencies' help. And we're not getting an adequate amount of that now by any means.
Subway violence is also surging in the Big Apple. Transit crime up 22% plus over the last year. Yesterday, in a less than 24-hour period, a 16-year-old boy was stabbed, an MTA worker and a Good Samaritan punched by a homeless man, and a Subway musician was attacked with a metal bottle. Ray, what are we going to do about this?
Well, the mayor drastically cut back overtime for the transit system. I assume that money is being taken for migrants, but that made a big difference in the subway. You saw much more of a uniform presence in the subway system. That's pretty much ended.
You know what? He's right about that. He's right about that. When you do take the MTA, you don't see the presence of police officers on the platform, or sometimes they'll get onto the train and go back and forth on these stops. Maybe 2 or 3 stops, and then they'll rotate. So they kind of like have a little district or a little zone on the actual MTA that they and their partner they're usually in pairs. I don't normally see them not in pairs, but lately they're not around. So obviously there's some sort of budgetary cut that's going on. But New York's going straight down.
than it was. So we've got to free up that money, get those cops back in the subway. The subway is the lifeblood of New York City. If we don't have that, we're going to have very little. Commerce is going to really grind to a halt. So we got a lot of things coming together here in New York City that are problematic, no question about it.
And much of it originates at the southern border, the wide open border.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you see, we have now supposedly about 170,000 migrants in New York City. We've had almost 8 million cross the border in the last 3 years. There's no vetting going on. People are coming in, and they're coming in from all over the world. It's not just South America.
Yeah.
They're coming from Europe. They're coming from Iran. They're coming from the Middle East.
Yeah. And China, by the way, Chinese nationals, they look
China,
like
of course.
me.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and take a look at my pulmonology module that I have uploaded. There are 22 PDF files that an individual will have access to if they purchase the module for $50, and they will also get a video lecture accompanying each of the different topics that I cover. I cover 22 individual topics in pulmonology. You will learn a lot about how the lungs work, and you'll end up turning into a citizen scientist, being more discerning of what's happening in the news, especially when it comes to health and fitness. You'll be able to read articles, published articles, and understand them better. So you can have your own assessment of what is going on. I don't want you to rely on individuals telling you the information. You need to build up the skills to be your own citizen scientist. Not only that, you'll be challenged by learning something new about medicine, about how the body works, a lot of science, and it's fun. Right? You can, the way I set this up, it's not too daunting, but I build you up step by step in each of the systems, the medical systems. The first one that I did was the pulmonology one, thinking that, because of the crisis we went through, there's going to be a lot of lung issues. The next one will be infectious diseases. So, but the main point here is so you become a citizen scientist. Challenge your brain, get those neurons firing so it helps with the anti-aging. Because if you don't challenge your brain, you're going to age and you're going to lose mental acuity. It's only for $50 and you get a lot of information. Let me tell you what you get, not just the 22 PDF files and individual videos for each of those PDF files. And you'll be able to download those PDF files and keep them. But you'll get knowledge in pulmonary embryology, pulmonary anatomy, pulmonary physiology, hemoglobin, pulmonary circulation, hypoxia, ventilation and perfusion, carbon dioxide, lung physical exam. You'll start out, in the video, I actually show where the auscultation points are and the percussion points are to evaluate the lungs, and the sounds that you will hear in the stethoscope for different types of diseases. Pulmonary functional tests, obstructive lung disease, restrictive lung disease, treatment of COPD and asthma, pneumonia, pleural disease, lung cancer, sleep apnea, cystic fibrosis, tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, pulmonary embolism, and chest x-rays. So you're going to learn about radiology. You're going to learn a lot for $50. All right. I have already uploaded the first 11 categories that I read. All right. Each day I upload a new lecture. Each business day I upload a new lecture. All right. And then after everything's uploaded, I'm going to go into a new module and start populating that, creating PDF files and doing lectures. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and click on store and go to classes and purchase the pulmonology module for $50. You will get a password emailed to you for you to enter the classes. All right. So keep on, write down that password, and you'll be able to enter the class for you. So please go to the store and get the pulmonology module for only $50. You will learn a lot, and you'll become a citizen scientist over time. All right. It's not sugar coated. There's detail, but I do it in a slow, progressive way, so it builds up the knowledge for you. And after you finish the module, you're going to know a lot about pulmonology. Now, I want to play one more video.
So we've seen a state.
I want to play one more video about how the city is going to hell. Let's see here. Actually, I want to diverge. I'm going to play CNN with this whole lawyer thing that's going on. Or maybe, no. Let's listen to the breaking news about the Russian opposition leader dying in prison.
As Russia's leading opposition figure, Alexei Navalny piled pressure on the Kremlin and put a target on his back. Born in 1976 in what was then the Soviet Union, Navalny trained as a lawyer and rose to prominence as a political blogger. In 2011, he started the Anti-Corruption Foundation, which exposed the extravagant wealth of Russian officials, including President Vladimir Putin.
The biggest thing that Putin is afraid of is public discontent in Russia, and that is why it's so afraid of opposition leaders.
Navalny's and Putin's stars were intertwined. As Putin tightened his grip on power, Navalny became a leading figure at anti-government protests. We will force them to live by the law because we hold the power here, he shouted. He was arrested countless times and turned attacks to his advantage. In 2017, after announcing his intentions to run for president, Navalny was attacked with green dye twice. Maybe the Kremlin thinks that I will not record videos with a green face, he said, but now even more people will watch. In 2019, as Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation gained support nationally, police raided their offices and arrested several activists, including, of course, Navalny. But in 2020, his life was threatened like never before. On a plane traveling from Siberia to Moscow, Navalny became deathly ill. He fell into a coma and was put on a ventilator. While recovering in a German hospital, investigators revealed he had been poisoned with Novichok, a Soviet-era neurotoxin. Navalny blamed Putin for the attack, a claim the Kremlin denies. Miraculously, Navalny recovered and participated in the investigation into his own poisoning, documenting the whole thing on social media. Despite the threats against his life, in January 2021, Navalny and his wife Yulia voluntarily returned to Moscow, where he was immediately arrested, ostensibly for violating the terms of a 2014 embezzlement case. Once in jail, he was tried and sentenced to more than 9 years in a maximum security prison. Navalny said the charges were politically motivated. But even behind bars, he found ways to make his voice heard, using social media to protest the Ukraine war and needle those in power. His legacy is one of defiance, a constant thorn in the side of the Kremlin. Richard Engel, NBC News.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about
There's a
breaking
couple.
news.
There's a couple things that pop in mind when listening to that broadcast. One is the complexity of dealing with Putin. Now we know that Putin is ruthless, right? And he will eliminate his foes. And here's an example where you're using chemical weapons. This neurotoxin, right? That's targeted, by just touching the individual. So you have unconventional warfare, very, very surgically done, using neurotoxins. You have someone in power, Putin, that will eliminate his rivals. But you also have on the other side of this equation the poking of the bear from the CIA and this national security state that I've been talking about within the United States and this expansion of NATO. So you're going to hear in the mainstream media how bad Putin is by eliminating his foe, and it was wrong what Putin did. It, poisoning him and putting him in prison, and him dying in prison. And all these other individuals that he kind of eliminated over the years. So Putin has blood on his hands. But to say that the CIA and NATO don't have blood on their hands or nefarious motives, that's not looking at this objectively. Both sides are at fault. Putin is ruthless and the CIA is ruthless. All right. So it's, picking one side in this conflict, it would be problematic. If you're only on the side of Putin, you're not really paying attention to some of the nefarious things that he's doing. If you're only on the side of the CIA, then you're not paying attention to the nefarious things the CIA has been doing, especially since the fall of the Berlin Wall. So, we have to keep in mind that this is a means to try to fracture Russia and get its resources from the US perspective or the Western allies perspective. Reduce the power that Russia can project or is projecting. So, just realize that this war in Ukraine is this national security state versus Russia. But Putin is knocking out people that he shouldn't be. I mean, he's ruthless. He's a ruthless person. But so is our intelligence agencies, especially against its own American citizens. So let's just be honest to where we are with this whole problem in Ukraine. It's not as simple as Russia good, US bad, or US good and Russia bad. That's my point. Now, I want to go to DW because they have a more extensive breaking news on this announcement.
We begin with breaking news from Russia. The prison agency there has just announced that imprisoned opposition leader Alexei Navalny has died. Russia's Federal Prison Service said in a statement that Navalny felt unwell after a walk on Friday and lost consciousness. It said an ambulance arrived to try to rehabilitate him, but he died. Navalny's press secretary said they hadn't been informed of his death and a lawyer was on the way to the prison. A spokesperson for Vladimir Putin said the Russian president had been informed of the 47-year-old's death, but the Kremlin had no further information at this point. Navalny was a staunch critic of the Kremlin. He was arrested in 2021 when he returned to Russia after receiving medical treatment in Germany for what medical tests showed was a nerve agent poisoning. And for more on this, we are now joined by Yuri Risheto, who heads the DW Bureau in Riga. That's where the DW Moscow Bureau relocated to after DW was asked to leave Russia by authorities. Yuri, what more do we know at this stage?
Well, what we know so far is that Navalny allegedly collapsed while walking in penal colony number 3 in the Russian north. Apparently, he suddenly felt unwell, bad, and couldn't no longer be rescued. This is the official version of the Russian authorities. His fellow campaigners, the members of the so-called Navalny team, you said it, has not yet confirmed his death. This is what his press secretary reported. She says that Navalny's lawyer is on his way to the penal colony in the Russian north. An interesting detail, maybe during his lifetime, Navalny's name was almost never mentioned in official news. President Putin also never mentioned his name, but spoke of a blogger or a Berlin patient. This time, Russian news on state television was interrupted and announcers or speakers reported the news of Navalny's death.
What does that say to us about who Alexei Navalny was as a politician, and more importantly, what significance he had for Russia?
Well, Navalny was certainly the best-known Russian politician, extremely popular in Western countries, controversial in Russia itself, less known among older Russians, but among younger Russians. He was something like the shining light of the Russian opposition. He was often mentioned as the leader of the opposition. The problem is that there has been no common democratic opposition in Russia in recent years, so it's problematic to name him as an opposition leader. What is certain, however, is that he has done the most for the democratic processes in Russia, because he was the biggest and most dangerous critic of the of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. And he is the only politician in Russia, or he was the only politician in Russia, who has managed to bring broad masses of critically thinking Russians onto the streets. Hundreds of thousands have protested against the Kremlin, against Putin, and for Navalny in recent years, not only in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but across the whole country, even if thousands had to pay for these protests with their money or their freedom.
Who was he, though, as a person, and what was his life like?
Well, Alexei Navalny died at just 47 years old. In addition to his political work, he was a lawyer. He also earned his money as a lawyer. He had a wife and 2 children. His older daughter lives and studies in the USA. Navalny himself, of course, became known worldwide when he was poisoned in Russia on a flight in Siberia in 2020. He was then treated in Berlin in the hospital and recovered from his poisoning. And then he returned to Russia in 2021, where he was immediately arrested and put in prison. Many people were very surprised at the time as to why Navalny returned to Russia at all after the apparent attempted murder of him. But he said he was a Russian politician and he wanted to do politics in Russia and not from abroad. In addition to his political work, Navalny was known as an investigative journalist. His team published dozens of videos that exposed the alleged secret lives of Russia's top politicians. And the most famous video seen by millions of people in Russia and around the world was certainly a documentary about President Putin's supposedly secret palace on the Black Sea. So this video was certainly a sensation, and its protagonist, President Putin, was probably not happy about it.
You said a while back that he was certainly very popular. Alexei Navalny was certainly very popular here in the West, but how popular was he among Russians?
Well, look, as I said, the tragedy of Navalny as a politician was that he risked everything, but still didn't have very broad support among millions of Russians. Yeah, he was popular with the younger people. He used their language of communication, especially YouTube, internet, but he was less popular with the older population, and he wasn't even well known by some. This was also because Navalny was often seen as a protest politician, what he actually was. That means voters knew what he was against, but not what he was for. His return from Berlin after his recovery, after the treatment, was certainly, a very big topic, and he certainly won the eyes of many people as a brave man. But he became increasingly quiet after that when he was arrested and put in prison. So the state media completely ignored him, and the independent media reported on his harsh prison conditions and also repeatedly published his current political comments.
About those prison conditions, what do we know about them?
Well, if you believe his team's reports, his prison conditions must have been very, very harsh. And Navalny was first held in a prison in Vladimir, near Moscow, in central Russia. Then he was moved some months ago to the penal colony number 3 in Yamalo-Nenetsk. He is said to have been constantly punished and transferred to a punishment cell. The few photos or videos that appeared during his detention showed a very sick man, but still trying to smile and spread optimism.
We'll leave it there for the time being. DW's Vika Bureau Chief Yuri Bitchute. Thanks so much for that context. And for more of this, let's talk to DW's Chief Political Editor, Michaela Kufner, who joined me now from the Munich Security Conference venue. Michaela, news of Alexei Navalny's death has trickled into the conference venue. What are some of the reactions you're hearing?
Well, there is a real sense of shock here. We saw the opening of the Munich Security Conference actually start with Christoph Heusgen, the director of the MSC, mentioning that Alexei Navalny had died. He said only a few minutes ago, and saying that the thoughts of everybody were with his wife, who's also here in Munich, actually, and his children. I spoke to an analyst here who reads a lot into the timing of this death. Says he doesn't believe that this was not a deliberate signal to world leaders gathering here at the Munich Security Conference. So we don't want to go down any kind of rabbit hole of potential theories here, but it is a striking coincidence that news of Alexei Navalny should come just as leaders gather here, with Russia deliberately not invited here, not wanted at the global table, which is there to resolve these many conflicts. Ukraine now towering high over this, but of course also the conflict in the Middle East. So a collective sense of shock here, but not of disbelief that this happened.
Michaela, it is hard to find, I suppose, arguably, any Russian politician who was so loved in the West as Alexei Navalny was. And I wonder what the attendees at the Munich Security Conference have told you about what that means for Russia going forward under Vladimir Putin.
Well, this is essentially seen as yet another sign of the decisiveness with which Vladimir Putin wants to disengage completely. The German foreign minister actually in a tweet on X before she headed here, she's on her way here right now, said that Alexei Navalny epitomized the wish for a free and democratic Russia like few others, and that is the very reason why he died. And that her thoughts were with his family. So clearly the message is being received here that this is Russia cutting yet more ties and letting any kind of illusion that there might be some goodwill or good faith on the Russian side evaporate.
Is there any soul searching perhaps amongst delegates there or amongst Western nations? Because when Alexei Navalny went back to Russia, they were really unable to influence the Russian government at all as to when it came to how he was treated in prison.
Well, the entire conflict, the attack on Ukraine, is the proof, if anyone needed it, that there is no influencing Russia at this moment in time. I think it will be very interesting to hear what the Chinese foreign minister says here on Saturday, who wouldn't condemn that war directly in the past, but also China sending slightly mixed signals, being an ally of Russia, but at the same time not wanting any more conflict. This is clearly also hurting Chinese interests. So that will be a very interesting voice to listen to here. But as you said, Alexei Navalny deliberately left the safety of Germany and went back to Russia. So few people are surprised that this is how his life was tragically taken from him by the Russian regime, really. That is clearly sending a message, if anybody needed it, that engagement with Russia is not just difficult, it probably is not very constructive at this point in time.
We'll leave it there for the time being, but thanks so much for joining us, DW's Chief Political Editor, Nikhil.
Let me just go to commercial here because this is PNN. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the anti-Fauci beginners or advanced box. What is in the anti-Fauci box? It is Max 35. It neutralizes pathogens. This is a liquid. You take it. You take a teaspoon of it if you're not, on a daily basis. But if you're not feeling well, then take a tablespoon or two. It'll neutralize pathogens. You swish it in your mouth and you swallow it. Magnesium and zinc helps to boost up your immune system. Vitamin D3 helps to absorb calcium. It's a gene expression cofactor, and it helps to get cells that need to go into apoptosis into apoptosis. Also, in the box, the anti-Fauci box, is turmeric. It's an antioxidant, and it'll also bring down inflammation. And lastly, in the beginner's box, you have ashwagandha root, which will control the blood glucose levels. You get everything that I just showed you for $200 in the anti-Fauci box. Very high quality supplements. For the advanced box, you have the choice of a 2-ounce C60 either in avocado or in coconut. You take a full dropper of this every day, and what will happen is you're going to be soaking up those free radicals, reducing the cellular stress, improving your mitochondria, and boosting up your ATP. This way, you're going to be slowing down the aging process because you're neutralizing those free radicals. But not just that, you're going to have more energy, and that will be the energy that you need to help boost up your immune system. Everything that I have mentioned here is synergistic as part of the anti-aging protocol to help boost up your immune system. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Under the anti-aging boxes, you can purchase an anti-Fauci beginner's box or an anti-Fauci advanced box. The advanced box is $260. The beginner's box is $200. Back to the news.
With that, joining us from the Bayerischer Hof, the venue of the Munich Security Conference. Thanks so much. Alexei Navalny was the most prominent Russian opposition figure. Here's a closer look at his life and resistance to Putin's Russia.
It didn't take long for Alexei Navalny to become Russia's leading opposition figure. But his high profile angered the state. The former lawyer was regularly arrested and jailed for his anti-corruption campaigns. He also faced numerous criminal probes, including embezzlement charges, which eventually led to a conviction. He and his supporters always maintained the charges were politically motivated. In 2013, Navalny ran in the Moscow mayoral election. His second place galvanized his supporters, and in 2016, he said he'd stand for president against Vladimir Putin. His growing political profile only earned him more enemies. He faced attacks like this one at an airport in southern Russia. A year later, he was hospitalized after being hit with green chemical dye, leaving him almost blind in one eye. Navalny was barred from running against Putin in the 2018 election because of his embezzlement conviction. But nothing could stop him from campaigning against the president and Russian corruption. Not even frequent arrests. In December 2019, authorities raided his anti-corruption foundation office, the FBK. The following July, he was forced to shut it down.
Attention, this is not an emergency drill. FBK is closing.
And then a month later came the poisoning in Siberia. Navalny was left in a coma. Doctors believe he swallowed poison while drinking tea. He was eventually flown to Berlin, where he spent several weeks in intensive care. Confirmation that it was a chemical attack caused a diplomatic standoff with Moscow. The Kremlin denied it had anything to do with the assassination attempt.
The last thing Putin can do is put a large placard on the Kremlin which says, "Alexei, please, under no circumstances, return back home." But coming to Germany was not my choice. It's a cool country, but I'm not here on my own free will. I'm here because they tried to kill me.
Despite the risks, in January 2021, Alexei Navalny flew back to Russia and was immediately arrested. Protests took place across the country that officials quickly stamped out. But the Kremlin critic couldn't be silenced. Within days of his arrest, his team released a pre-recorded video in which he claimed Putin owned a lavish secret palace worth billions, alleging it was all financed by taxpayers' money. Moscow denied the claims, but the story quickly went viral. Yet more proof of the political leader's influence and appeal. He continued to manage the opposition movement he founded from behind bars, resulting in ever longer jail terms. By August 2023, he'd been sentenced to more than 30 years. His supporters, convinced the Russian state had finally succeeded in silencing its most vocal critic.
So that was DW. Now, Petraeus is being interviewed on Times Radio.
Hi, Mark Barnett, Sandy Hook Promise here. When the gunman shot his way into Sandy Hook Elementary School,
a tragedy. The most courageous, most significant opponent to Vladimir Putin, a truly extraordinary figure in the Russian landscape. In a way, I'm surprised that he lived as long as he did. This is a country, as you know, where you don't go near open windows or umbrellas with tips on a sunny day. And again, I'm almost surprised that it took this long for him to meet this tragic end.
Just bringing you some breaking news out of Russia. This is sure to be one of the day's biggest stories. Vladimir Putin's main opponent, the imprisoned dissident Alexei Navalny, has died. That's according to reports from the Russian prison service breaking this morning. He is the jail critic of President Vladimir Putin and the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. In a statement published on its website, the Russian prison service said that Navalny had felt unwell after a walk on Friday and almost immediately lost consciousness. It said that medical staff had been called, but they were unable to resuscitate Navalny. The reason of death is still being established. There's no immediate confirmation of the 47-year-old's death by his supporters. Only last month, he was seen laughing and joking in court in an apparent show of defiance after being transferred to a prison camp in Russia's Arctic region. Now, allies of Navalny, who is Putin's biggest domestic critic, have been unable to locate him for almost 3 weeks in December after he'd been moved from the IK6 prison colony near Moscow to an even stricter penal facility called the Polar Wolf. Speaking via video link at his first official court hearing since his disappearance last month, he jokingly asked officials from the IK6 facility if he and other prison staff had held a party to celebrate his departure from the Arctic. And the question was struck down by the judge. He replied, Okay, I'll rephrase it. Was it a party or a karaoke evening? It's an insight there into the psychology and the character of Alexei Navalny, one of the most the most high-profile critic and opponent of Vladimir Putin's regime in Russia, who, according to a statement just out from the Russian prison service, has died in custody at the age of 47. He was arrested in January 2021 after returning to Moscow from Berlin, where he'd spent months recovering from a near-fatal poisoning that he said was ordered by Putin. He is serving prison sentences, or was serving prison sentences, totaling more than 30 years on charges of fraud and extremism that he always said were trumped up by the Kremlin to prevent him from challenging Putin's long rule. That now seems to have been foreclosed by that breaking news that Alexei Navalny, the Putin opponent, the Russian opposition leader, one of the most high-profile voices dissenting against the Putin regime in Russia, has died in a penal colony in Russia's Arctic Circle. We'll bring you more on that breaking story as the show continues. We'll be hearing from the former director of the CIA, David Petraeus, in just a moment. He's not yet on the line, but we'll hear from him soon. We've been hearing all from you recently this morning as well on today's breaking news at home about the by-elections. Loads and loads of people sharing the view of Tim Montgomery, who was my guest earlier, who, despite having worked for basically every Conservative leader since Margaret Thatcher and founding the website Conservative Home, he thinks the Conservative Party are basically done for at the next election. But one listener, Kevin on the text, calls him a pathetic defeatist. So there you go. There are still some people out there who believe the Conservative Party are still with a chance at the next election. Who knows what will happen? Voters are volatile. But let's return to that big breaking news this morning. The Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny, a vocal critic of President Vladimir Putin, has died. That's according to the Russian prison service. We can go now to the former director of the CIA, David Petraeus. He's at the Munich Security Conference, and he joins me now. General Petraeus, the reaction, please, to the death of Navalny.
A tragedy. The most courageous, most significant opponent of Vladimir Putin, a truly extraordinary figure in the Russian landscape. In a way, I'm surprised that he lived as long as he did. This is a country, as you know, where you don't go near open windows or umbrellas with tips on a sunny day. And again, I'm almost surprised that it took this long for him to meet this tragic end. But keep in mind that he returned to his country when he could have stayed in Europe. But he went back because of the principle of opposing Putin and doing so in such a forceful and effective manner. Incredible use of social media, as you recall, exposing Putin's enormous compound on the Black Sea and so forth. So really quite significant.
And what does this mean, do you think, for Putin's authority? I mean, if anything, if it's what everybody would suspect it was. I mean, in any circumstances, Navalny had been imprisoned in the Arctic Circle, and so whatever the circumstances of his death, clearly Putin was asserting his authority. I mean, it's worth saying our defence correspondent George Grills on Twitter is reporting that Navalny's press secretary has not had any confirmation of his death yet. His lawyer is flying to get information. But given what we've heard from the Russian prison service, it's clear that Navalny probably has passed away. And what does this mean for Putin? He's just lost one of his most eloquent critics, most forceful critics, most well-known critics, and his authority over Russia looks to be pretty total, David Petraeus.
Well, it's absolute. Keep in mind what he did to Prigozhin when Prigozhin took a swing at the emperor, if you will. Of course, he thought better of it as he got within 2 hours driving distance with his column from the Wagner group when he was going to seize the Minister of Defense and Chief of the General Staff and hold him hostage until they restored his contracts and soldiers. But he didn't last that long either. You've seen most recently that the most popular opponent in the upcoming election has been declared ineligible for some various trumped up reasons. So there's no longer even any pretense, really, that this is a country in which there is any kind of free speech. They've been taking over the social media. Most recently, they already controlled the other forms of media. Many of their critics have actually left the country rather than stay there, given the threats if they do anything on the streets. So he is cracking down completely. And this is a total authoritarian system at this point in time. And of course, he undoubtedly feels that he has to do this, given the enormous price that Russia is paying in its attempt to take over Ukraine, a country which Putin denies the right to exist. Again, keeping in mind his grievance-filled, revanchist and revisionist view of history, that is what animated this brutal and unprovoked invasion.
Well, you mentioned Ukraine. We are now on the brink, it seems, turning our eye to Washington, D.C., of the American political establishment abandoning the Ukrainian war effort and the West facing a moment of truth on Ukraine. You had David Cameron, Lord Cameron, our Foreign Secretary, urging Republican politicians on Capitol Hill not to abandon the Ukrainians. That remains to be seen. You have Donald Trump threatening to pull out of NATO. And all the while, you have an emboldened Putin bumping off anyone who's a threat to him. You have the only opposition politician in Alexei Navalny, who is now dead, according to the Russian prison service. I mean, this is a really crucial moment for the West, isn't it, David Petraeus?
It is. It's a very pivotal moment for the West, and ironically, Europe has been doing what the U.S. has long sought that it would do. More countries than ever are projected to achieve the 2% spending of GDP on defense. I think it's 18 out of 31 this year, according to the NATO Secretary General. The EU as a body just approved $54 billion equivalent of additional assistance to Ukraine. That's after they had already provided 2 for every 1 U.S. in aggregate, if you take in not just security, but also the other forms of economic, financial, and humanitarian assistance. And they're solidly behind Ukraine. And we see this challenge in Washington that has emerged, which again is so strange because there is bipartisan support in both houses of the U.S. Congress for support for Ukraine. But because of the dynamics of the majority party, very slim majority party in the House of Representatives, it's not certain that that will get a vote. I think it will in the end. I strongly agree with David Cameron, who was one of my wartime prime ministers when I was the commander of NATO forces in Afghanistan, in fact. And I strongly agree with his encouragement to the United States to continue to support a country that is under siege by someone, a republic that is a federation that is.
I don't even know who I'm looking at right now.
I think it's the happiest I've ever been in my life.
What did you just say?
I really took the best of the circumstances of a person who hates people and yet had to be amongst them.
A republic that is a federation that is led by a brutal, kleptocratic, authoritarian figure.
And standing, the boy with his finger in the dike, as it were, is President Zelensky, who's addressing.
And he'll be here tomorrow.
Yes. Addressing the conference
and Vice
tomorrow.
President Harris will be here in about 2 hours. She will be on stage again shortly. All eyes will be on her and what she says and how reassuring she is. But it's difficult for her, given the questions, again, around the continued support in this package, whether it will get a vote in the House of Representatives and so on. And then, of course, the questions raised about U.S. support for NATO, which I believe is, again, the most important alliance in history. It's one that I served, again, as a 1-star, 3-star, and 4-star, usually with a U.S. hat as well. But all the way back to when I was a lieutenant, the first unit was actually part of the NATO Allied Command Europe Mobile Force, and many years after that. So, again, I am a believer in the transatlantic partnership. Huge believer, huge supporter, have been committed to it a number of times professionally, and I strongly believe that we should continue to support it, especially now that the Europeans are actually doing what we've been after them to do for so many years, if not decades, actually.
Do you think for some Republicans this might be a reminder, today's news might be a reminder of the sort of president people think they are appeasing in Vladimir Putin? It was only last week that Tucker Carlson was having a pretty chummy fireside chat with President Putin. You have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who said David Cameron could kiss her ass and said she didn't care. It looked like she was appeasing Hitler. That was the comparison David Cameron made. Do you think news like this out of Russia with President Navalny, you'll have President Zelensky giving his response in Munich tomorrow? Do you think for some people on Capitol Hill, this might be a moment of recognition, of waking up and smelling the coffee and really realizing what this Russian regime is like? Or have they gone off the reservation completely, do you think?
Well, first of all, again, as I mentioned earlier, there is strong bipartisan support for Ukraine in the Congress. It's really all about the dynamics in the House, where a small group of individuals can hold the speaker hostage. And we saw the previous speaker topple because he did something with which they did not agree. But this should.
But our founding fathers wanted that to be. They wanted dialogue. They didn't want things to be rammed through Congress. They wanted debate to slow down the making of bills. See, if the national security state doesn't like the result that's in the House, they use terms like held hostage or a bunch of people that are, anti-country. But our founding fathers wanted debate. They wanted to slow down government. But the national security state doesn't like that when they want money. The national security state doesn't like that when the people say no more war. The national security state doesn't like that when you ask them, what are you really doing when they have these hearings? Are you surveilling the American public illegally? And you have officials from the letter agencies, the 3-letter agencies, saying no, and then you find out they lied to Congress and nothing happens? That's not what our founding fathers wanted. The national security state is out of control. The national security state needs to be destroyed. And Petraeus betrayed him. He isn't a person that you need to worry about. He's not on your side. Assuming that the one that's listening is the average American citizen or even the average world citizen, all right? They're not on your side. And if you question their authority, if you question the national security state, they go after you. They try to suppress you. They try to clamp down on with the shadow banning, or they'll surveil you. Or if you're a journalist like Tucker, they'll threaten you. This boy is evil. But so is Putin. Let's be fair. Putin's evil too. But Petraeus betrayed us.
A very significant reminder of the kind of leader with whom we're dealing here, and a reminder that Russia, however diminished in certain ways, including because of its actions in this particular case against Ukraine, but also others over the years, is still a very formidable power, largest nuclear arsenal in the world. Yes, you can dismiss it as a gas station with guns or nukes, and there's truth to that. But it has lots of crude oil, natural gas, and coal that the rest of the world still is willing to buy, at least part of it. He's put his economy on a wartime footing to try to prevail in Ukraine, and we should recognize he won't stop in Ukraine. He'll go on to Moldova, he'll go on to Lithuania, other countries, which would be a much, much bigger problem. And then finally, we have to keep in mind, one of the points that your countryman Andrew Roberts and I made in our recent book, Conflict, is that what happens in one part of the world reverberates in others. When we withdrew from Afghanistan, although we didn't have to.
So true that it can reverberate. But let's not forget that posturing in the 90s, early 90s, led to the crisis that we have. And that American posturing against the crumbling Soviet Union and the emergence of Russia, a new Russia, we didn't manage that very well as the United States. We failed miserably. And that reverberated into the Putin that we have today. And then I love it on how betray us. All right. How he goes, we didn't have to leave Afghanistan. No, we did need to leave Afghanistan. American taxpayers were fed up paying $5 trillion in a Middle Eastern war that we should have never been in after 9/11. Couldn't get the job done, General. Oh, General. What war did you win? Oh, none. Oh, okay. Okay, General.
President Xi in Beijing said, "See, you can't count on the Americans." And look how it went. They're a superpower in decline. If we were not to support Ukraine, it would.
We are a superpower in decline. You know why? Because we have people in the inner city stealing iPads and iPhones. Can't pull up their pants. We have mayors that aren't willing to prosecute criminals. We have DAs going after presidential candidates while they should be going after criminals in the inner city. We have a national security state that is always a pig at the trough. And the US taxpayer, think about it, Gen Xers have seen too much fucking war. The bulk of the Middle East was on the backs of Gen X. That is from 91 all the way to when we left Afghanistan. The majority of the haul of the servicemen were Gen Xers. We're fed up with it. Betray us. We didn't have to leave. You had an American public that didn't want to be there. Yeah, you had to leave. The way we left was poorly managed because we have a White House that is run by an idiot.
Deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, which of course is the main theater of the world, one where the most important relationship of the world resides, that between the U.S., our Western allies and partners, and China. We can wish that relationship could be much more mutually beneficial, and I do, but you have to deal with the way the world is, not the way you'd like it to be, as I learned as the CIA director. And in this case, we need to ensure that deterrence is rock solid.
That's right. Betray us with CIA. Oh. Interesting. Very interesting. Don't trust the talking heads from the CIA. Don't trust them. They feel as though they're their own government. Right? Betray us.
Indo-Pacific, and keeping in mind that the elements of deterrence are twofold. First, the potential adversary's assessment of your capabilities, and then second, their assessment of your willingness to employ them. And not helping Ukraine, after all that we've done for them so far, and all that they're doing against a very common enemy, a brutal common enemy, would seriously undermine that.
Betray us. Do you remember that coup in 2014 that the United States did in Ukraine? Betray us? You do remember that, right?
Second element of deterrence in the Indo-Pacific.
And just a final word from you, David Petraeus. Joe Biden has called Benjamin Netanyahu to urge restraint in Rafah, the city populated by 1 million Palestinians, ahead of a potential IDF ground assault. Do you think the Israelis are listening?
No, I'm sure they're listening. The question is, what might be the ways in which they'll refine their campaign. And first of all, let me just be very clear. I believe that Israel does need it.
Petraeus, there's a difference between hearing and listening. They're hearing, they're not listening. Nor should they. Because if we do it your way, we'll spend another $5 trillion and not get the job done. General, what war did you win? None. How many wars did you start? A lot.
Destroy Hamas. I agree with that objective. They do have to dismantle the Hamas political wing. Obviously, they have to get their hostages back as well. But how they do that does matter. Hearts and minds matter. They're going to end up owning Gaza by default for some transitional period at the very least. And again, I absolutely support their efforts to improve their security and ensure that Hamas not only is destroyed, which means, by the way, to be rendered incapable of accomplishing their mission without reconstitution. You've got to ensure that they cannot reconstitute as well. So again, this is very, very important that as they go forward, that they continue to refine the strategy, look at some of the operations we carried out during the surge in Iraq, for example, where we did clear hold and build operations, and again, taking care of the people and ensuring that they know that we want to provide a better life for them. I think it's crucially important that that be added to their objectives.
But the problem here, Petraeus, is that if you do that, if the American taxpayer gives all this weaponry and support, and let's say Ukraine, which I don't think they will be able to, but let's say Ukraine was able to hold positions. What's going to happen is that Ukraine, whatever they're holding, is eventually going to be integrated into NATO. And it goes to the red line, it crosses the red line of what Putin has already mentioned. Ukraine cannot go into NATO. So this posturing that you are doing, betray us, is leading to World War III. I mean, we are run by a bunch of idiots, or a bunch of people that are on the take, or maybe there are a bunch of idiots that are on the take.
Destroy Hamas, dismantle the political wing, and recover their hostages.
Well, David Petraeus, former director of the CIA.
David Petraeus, the former director. Let's look at his record at the CIA. Let's just, quickly zoom in, because, I did a video about this a while back about, how it parlays to bioweapon development. Yeah. So let's see, what we got here? What we got with Petraeus? Where did he serve? Where did he serve? He served as director of the CIA from September 6, 2011 until his resignation November 9th, 2012. The overthrow in the Ukraine the coup was in 2014. So he was already out of the CIA at that time. Cold War mentality. Cold War mentality isn't going to help us. There we go, John Bolton. Another war hawk.
A lot of Westerners underestimated Putin. I've known him for a long time. I think he's one of the most cold-blooded men I've ever met, and he'll do what's necessary to stay in power, and he's still in power.
John Bolton, are you clear that the death of Alexei Navalny is a political assassination by Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think it's very hard to believe that somehow this happened by natural causes or anything like that. They used to say during the Cold War, this is no coincidence, comrade. I think if this is borne out,
Are you noticing a theme? I constantly hear these talking heads referring to Cold War tactics or Cold War phrases, Cold War mentality. Maybe that's the wrong mentality. Maybe we have too much Cold War.
obviously waiting for more information, that it will be a sign that Vladimir Putin thinks he's very much in charge and really not worried about the consequences domestically or international.
Well, let's talk about the consequences, because I mean, Putin has been condemned and sanctioned around the world, and yet he seems to be acting with impunity. How should the international community respond to this?
Well, I think the best way would be, certainly in the case of the United States, to get over the disputes we're having over military assistance to Ukraine and get that resolved. But the fact is that Russia, in the past 2 years, since the second invasion of Ukraine, has unfortunately done a very good job of evading Western sanctions, which were not well designed, particularly on the sale of Russian oil and gas. And certainly not well enforced. And he's gotten assistance from what I think is a new axis that's been developed with China, with satellites like Iran and North Korea. So certainly things have not gone entirely well for Putin over the past 2 years, but he still controls double the territory he controlled before the invasion. And I'm very much afraid Western resolve is flagging. I'm sure there'll be expressions of outrage over Navalny's death. The real question is whether there'll be anything more than expressions.
Right, so action is needed, and I suppose the best forum for that action is in the war in Ukraine. That's your suggestion, that really the US and its European allies need to redouble their efforts now to ensure that Ukraine wins that war.
Well, it'd be nice in the case of the United States, I'll just confine myself to that for the moment, to say something other than we want to defeat Russia. That's not enough. Preventing Russia from winning is one way of saying it, but the real objective should be to repulse the invaders, going back not just to 2 years ago, but going back to 2014. If you don't believe that unprovoked aggression should be rewarded, then the party that commits the aggression has to pay a price for it. And right now, the price that Russia's paying is well within their means, and the war continues.
What are the consequences then if the US?
What about the consequences or the price that needs to be paid by a overreach of the national security state? Johnny. There needs to be consequences when the CIA is overthrowing governments. There needs to be consequences when we don't tell the American public that we have special forces in Ukraine helping the Ukrainian army target generals and helping them on the battlefield. That's taxpayer money to train those special forces. Why is the CIA feeling that they need to do a coup in 2014? Why does the CIA think that since the fall of the Berlin Wall, that we should be fracturing Russia to get its oil? Meanwhile, we have a ton of oil in the United States that we're not using, not willing to use, not willing to pump. We have a gigantic reservoir of oil and natural gas in the United States. Why? And why isn't there a price to be paid for this overreach of the national security state? Both parties are at fault.
And I know you're confining yourself to the US, but from where we're sitting, Europe and the UK don't take the bull by the horns and deal with this threat from Putin.
Well, I think Putin will take it as a further sign of Western weakness, and he would be right to assess it that way. Obviously, we're in the middle of a very difficult presidential campaign over here. I think that's something Putin could take advantage of, and whether it's in Ukraine or pressure points elsewhere, or just trying to wear down U.S., European, UK resolve, as he indicated recently in his interview with Tucker Carlson, he's floated the idea of negotiations over Ukraine. He may think this is a point of maximum leverage for him to do that.
What would you like to hear from Trump now, who may well win that presidential election you just alluded to, after this latest apparent atrocity by the Kremlin regime?
Well, I doubt that he'll say much of anything. Really, what I'd like Trump to do is go away, but that's unfortunately not going to happen. I'd be very surprised if he issued any criticism of his friend Vladimir Putin.
And do you? I mean, obviously, Alexei Navalny's death is the latest in a long line of.
Yeah, Trump must be a Russian spy, right? National security state. Oh, isn't there some documents proving that there was some operation that was going on with the Five Eyes that led to some sort of FBI investigation that was fraudulent, going against one of the candidates that happened to be for the Republican Party, and his name was Trump? No, let's not talk about that, Johnny. No. I'm going to go to commercial. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the pulmonary module that I built up. You will learn pulmonology. There's 22 lectures. You get to download the PDFs for the slide deck for each of the lectures, and there is a video lecture accompanying each topic. So I go over the PowerPoints and explain the concept. I build you up step by step to understanding the pulmonary system, how the lungs work, the diseases of the lungs, how they're treated, what's the physiology, what's the embryology, what's the anatomy. You learn a lot about the pulmonary function just for $50. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. And in the store, you can purchase the class module for $50. Each business day, I load up a new lecture. There are 11 lectures already in the module, and there will be a total of 22 lectures for the pulmonology module. Then I will upload a new module dealing with another system in the body. If you do all these modules, you will learn a lot about medicine. You will be able to be a citizen scientist. You'll be able to listen to the news and have your own opinion about what is going on and how it may affect your health. In addition, when you go to the doctor, you're going to be a lot more educated. So you're going to reduce that power imbalance between the patient and the physician. Right now, most people don't know about science and don't know about medicine. But if you go in with more knowledge, and you're more concerned about your health, and you start challenging some of the treatments or some of the assessments that the doctor's doing because of what you've learned, you reduce that power imbalance. If you had more knowledge in 2020 about what was going on, if you had more knowledge, most likely we wouldn't have had some of the catastrophes that were taking place. But because we have a citizenry that's not that scientifically based, we had a problem, and people were taken advantage of by the powers that be. So go and get more educated. There's a lot of ways to do it. I'm just offering one way that I'm building you up. I'm building you up one step at a time to be able to learn about how the body works and how to improve your health for $50. What do you get in that module? You get pulmonary embryology, you get pulmonary anatomy, pulmonary physiology, hemoglobin, pulmonary circulation, hypoxia, ventilation and perfusion, how the body deals with carbon dioxide, lung physical exam. I show you how to do an auscultation and a percussion. I also explain and through examples, what the sounds that you'll hear in the stethoscope for different diseases, pulmonary functional tests, obstructive lung disease, restrictive lung disease, treatment for COPD and asthma, pneumonia, pleural disease, lung cancer, sleep apnea, cystic fibrosis, tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, pulmonary embolism, and chest x-rays. You learn a lot for 50 bucks. So please go to my store and purchase the pulmonology module.
Critics of Putin have met an untimely end. Do you have any hope of someone who's capable of standing up to Putin and forging a future for Russia that is democratic?
Well, I think we're a long way away from that. I mean, this is a country really without an effective governmental structure. At least during the Cold War, when Nikita Khrushchev, for example, messed up the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, there was a Politburo that could say to Khrushchev, "It's time for you to retire." There's nothing like that in Russia today. So any kind of change of government would have to be in effect by coup d'etat from the military or from the intelligence services, the Soloviki, the men of power, as they call them. And that's not necessarily guaranteed to lead to a better ruler from the West point of view. It's a very dangerous time, especially as China increases its influence and control over Russia.
And I just want...
My wife said, "Is that milk in your pants, or are you just happy to see me?"
Well, that's because nothing's impossible with the perfect genes.
They're insanely comfy and stretchy. I can do pretty much anything in them.
And I just wanted to get your reflections on Alexei Navalny and what he represented and how much of a threat he was to Putin.
Well, I think Putin saw him as enough of a threat to eliminate him. And let's face it, he died in prison. And the early explanations being given by Russian authorities are hardly convincing. I'm not sure we'll ever know the truth until there's a new regime in Moscow that sees it in their interest to reveal it. But that seems to be what happens when you're an adversary of Putin. You can ask Prigozhin about that just a few months before. So it means, I think, an indication that Putin feels in a strong position, feels he's in a strong enough position to eliminate one more opposition figure and get away with it.
And that the picture you paint of Putin is that he is really at the peak of his powers, which seems extraordinary when you think how Prigozhin challenged him before his untimely death. That's a moment of great danger for the world, isn't it?
Well, I think it's always hard to know exactly what the state of play is in an authoritarian society where real information is hard to come by. But I also think when looking back at the whole Prigozhin episode, a lot of Westerners underestimated Putin. I've known him for a long time. I think he's one of the most cold-blooded men I've ever met, and he'll do what's necessary to stay in power. And he's still in power.
And will be for the foreseeable future.
I think that's right. There's a lot of opposition to Putin, much of it among the Russian diaspora, and that's their biggest problem. They're not in Russia. They're in Europe or the United States criticizing, but it's not having any visible effect inside the country.
And so finally, when you look back at all the warnings we've had over the years about Putin, whether that's his opponents who have been poisoned or the annexation of Crimea, and where the international community didn't really stand up to him, how frustrated are you at those missed opportunities?
Well, I think it's a continuing indication of weakness in the West. And just speaking of American power, Donald Rumsfeld once said, "It's not American strength that's provocative, it's American weakness." So whether it's Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or any other figure like that, if they see a West that's not prepared to act strongly in its own interest, they will take advantage of it.
So when Trump appears to undermine NATO, as he did in his recent comments, how does that strike you?
Well, I think it delighted Putin, and I think people should understand this threat of Trump withdrawing from NATO is very serious. Just within the past few days, Putin has basically said he would prefer to have Joe Biden reelected as president. That is a classic example of a Russian influence operation, because that's exactly the opposite of what Putin wants.
Never ending NATO. That's what they want. Please go to my store, get the anti-aging boxes that I have curated, especially the anti-Fauci beginner's box or the advanced box. The beginner's box you can get for $200, and the anti-Fauci advanced box is $260. The supplements that are in there will help to neutralize pathogens, bring down inflammation, and bring down free radicals. It'll help to boost up your immune system and slow down the aging process. All right? Do it every day, and you're going to see major benefits. So please go to the store and get those boxes. Or you can buy individual items. I sell a lot of supplements, very, very high quality supplements. So go to the store and get them individually. Please subscribe to all my channels. I have 3 channels on YouTube. I have also Bitchute, Brighteon, and Rumble. Please subscribe to all 6 channels because I'm heavily censored on YouTube. Please follow me on GETTR and on X. That way you get a notification when I do, when I'm posting something or posting a video. So you are more informed to get around the censorship. And for the domestic or international audience that would like to help support my news coverage, please go to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video and all my videos. And on the home page, at the very bottom, there are 3 ways to donate. You can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee. So that will help to support my work and continue on with PNN. So thank you for listening and have a nice day.